Good evening. Welcome to the Housing Authority for the City of Salem for Monday, November 27th, 2023. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Commissioner Nishioka.
Here.
Vice Chair Phillips.
Here.
Commissioner Gwynn.
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Here.
Commissioner Hoy.
Here.
Commissioner Nordyke.
Here.
Commissioner Varney.
Here.
Resident Commissioner Villegas.
Here.
Chair Stapleton.
I'm here. Thank you. All right. Would you like to lead the room in the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any additions or deletions?
Not tonight.
Great, thank you. Any public comment? Okay, no public comment? All right, the consent calendar.
I move the consent calendar.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Tonight's consent calendar consists of item 3.1A, which is the October 2023 draft Salem Housing Authority minutes. And that concludes the consent calendar.
Great, thank you. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, would the recorder please call the roll?
Commissioner Nordyke.
Aye.
Commissioner Varney.
Aye.
Commissioner Nishioka.
Aye.
Vice Chair Phillips.
Aye.
Commissioner Gwynn.
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Aye.
Commissioner Hoy.
Aye.
Resident Commissioner Villegas.
Aye.
Chair Stapleton.
Aye, motion passes. Thank you. All right, we have no public hearings or special orders of business, but we do have a wonderful information report, and we have our housing administrator, Nicole Utes, here. Would you like to go ahead and give us an overview and then answer any questions if there are any? Thank you.
Good evening, I'm Nicole Utes. I'm the Housing Administrator for Salem Housing Authority. Just wanted to highlight some special highlights for our program management report end of year wrap up. This probably would have been 3 times as long as we actually acknowledged all the wonderful things that happened through the year. So they just tried to do tidbits from each of the programs. But wanted to highlight in our special programs team, our outreach navigators supported over 291 unsheltered neighbors with immediate life-sustaining supplies and helped them transition into permanent housing. During that time, that also included our Homeless Response Prevention Service dollars, which supported 66 clients. Also supported our bilingual Spanish-speaking navigator that helped many of those families, and expended over $121,000 in direct client support. We also, during the course of the last year, we have received emergency order dollars from the governor's office, and we've successfully housed over 43 individuals with those dollars currently. We are set to complete that funding by the end of January of 2024. We have, over the course of this last year, helped and supported over 20 homeless rental assistance program households with barrier removal and move-in assistance, and 10 of those have completed and graduated this year. So we'll continue on through June of 2024 with 10 more individuals. Currently, we have one thing I wanted to highlight in the housing specialist for any questions after this is our mainstream voucher funding is fully expended at 142 households, even though we're awarded 190 households. The balancing act with HUD is that we are actually awarded a certain amount of vouchers, but only a certain amount of funding. Due to the rent costs in our area, we're only able to serve 142 households. You will see some of those now starred, where we're fully expended with the dollars that we have received. One of the things I wanted to highlight, which has been a huge program relief, has been our landlord navigator. And some of the data that we have available to us since we've added the landlord navigator through the enhancing voucher grant program that was passed through the city of Salem, we have exceeded with more than 44% increase in our voucher utilization. We have one of the highest voucher utilizations in our area. That includes over 2,700 referrals that she's done to help connect voucher holders with available units. In our family self-sufficiency program, we love to highlight that we have over $500,000 of our clients have savings right now, which is wonderful. And escrows paid out this year exceeded $160,000 to individuals who graduated that program. Of our property management program, we have had over a 95, almost 96% occupancy rate through this entire last year. Obviously, there's a high need for affordable housing, but getting those units turned over quickly, and sometimes they come back in worse shape than we expect. That's a pretty good rate that we've kept up with. We've also had 96.75% of our residents' rent is paid across all of our complexes that we manage. That's all 14 of them. That's a pretty high collection rate for rent. So great job to all of them. One thing we wanted to note is that 374 new admissions to our voucher program happened. So 374 new households in the last year have received vouchering assistance. 103 of those households were experiencing homeless at the time of their admission. 80% of those new admissions, this is a question we're frequently asked, is how many of our clients are from this area? I can report to you 80% of our new admissions were households residing in Salem zip codes prior to admission, and 17% of them were from other areas of Oregon. 3% of them came from other states. And I will tell you that we are required by HUD to accept port-ins from other areas. So likely those 3% are a port-in that were admitted in another state and came to Salem. We had over 1,496 biennial inspections. We did discuss this at a previous meeting, and there's some additional data in there for you on the breakdown of what the failures were. We wanted to update you on our holidays. At Yaquina Hall, our residents coordinated an event that served over 57 meals on Thanksgiving to those living. The event lasted from noon to 6 p.m. and everyone was invited, including family members of residents and some staff, and their family also attended. At Redwood Crossings, they celebrated on Wednesday, the day before. The staff and service providers coordinated donations, prepped food in the community kitchen, and served a giant turkey. It was very impactful for the residents for the holiday meal. We wanted to thank Willamette Valley Pie Company. We were able to serve over 250 pieces of pie to our seniors over the holidays. We want to highlight that we are preparing for a save the date for the grand opening tour of Sequoia Crossings, and just mention that we know there's been a lot of discussion of the painting of Sequoia Crossings. And so we'd like to let you know that the color scheme of Sequoia Crossing was chosen based on principles of trauma-informed design. The uses of vibrant colors were inspired by nature, water, earth, and trees. You'll notice that we have Nichiha wood, metal, and various other materials on that on the actual units. The vibrant colors are to reflection of water, and the mosaic going down the wall is also a waterfall effect. So these colors are reflected in all aspects of the project design throughout. And then lastly, I just wanted to highlight a couple of collaborative efforts with the City of Salem teams. I wanted to thank Suzanne Reynolds and her code and compliance team, who are continually reaching out to serve the clients or the community of Salem. When they see a vulnerable individual in need, they will reach out to our teams and we will go in and see how we can help. We recently found that 2 people were living in very undesirable conditions that did not meet livability. Even though they were rentals, they were not habitable conditions. We have been able to connect with them, and hopefully we'll have them in new rentals and a new life here very soon. And then for Chief Niblock and his team at Salem Fire Department, paramedic firefighter Danielle Steffen, who has met with our management team to help us coordinate a peer support system. As many of you know, we are first responders, or often the people that get the tenants who come to us to call 911, and many of our staff experience a lot of the same first responder feels. And we are working hard to also implement a peer support system in our agency, much like the fire department has.
Thank you so much. It's a lot of information, a lot of fantastic work over the year. It was a joy to read this. And really, I wanted to thank staff for getting me the extra information on those inspections. And it was really interesting to read that bit and find out what exactly is causing all of the problems. And I hope that we can find a solution in the future to kind of get these more streamlined, not only for our staff and getting out there multiple times is very inefficient, but also for the folks that are living under these conditions and really do deserve to have all of these things in working order. So are there any questions? Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wonderful report. Under your special programs team, you stated that we supported more than 291 unsheltered neighbors with immediate life-sustaining supplies and transitioned into permanent housing. I hate to ask pop quiz type questions, and maybe this is information you can get to me after today's meeting. I'm curious what the demos are for the 291 unsheltered neighbors that you served. And I'm kind of curious, for example, how many of them do you know are struggling with mental illness? How many of them are parents with children? I'd be curious to hear more about this because this is wonderful. That's 291 lives that have been saved because of your work. And I'd love to know more about who these individuals are at another time, probably.
Absolutely. I think that team would be happy to provide that breakdown for you, and they do track all that information. So we'll get back to you on the next report.
Wonderful. And if I may,
Yes,
Madam
please.
Chair, I'm scrolling down to the next section of the report where I had a question. Okay, now moving to the family self-sufficiency section, you indicated that you had 20 graduates with escrow. Do the graduates mean individual people or families?
Those are 20 households.
20
So,
households.
The head of household is the actual physical graduate in HUD's terminology, but it's the 20 households met their escrow needs.
Okay, and on average, what are the sizes of these households?
That's another great question. I can tell you that just off the top of my head, in recent ones, they've been anywhere from 3 to 7 individuals in those households.
Thank you. Scanning the room to see if there's any other questions. I will say that the mayor and I went with Councilwoman Salinas to a tour of the housing with the waterfall and the beautiful paint. And we got, and it's beautiful. I think that it's a bold choice, but it's also really meaningful. And I loved taking the tour and hearing the purpose for what you're doing out there, and can really get behind that. So I am very excited to see that completed and full of people and thriving, for sure.
Yes, thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I think we are adjourned.
Good evening. I'll call to order this meeting of the City of Salem Urban Renewal Agency for Monday, November 27th, 2023. If the recorder will please call the roll.
Board Member Stapleton.
Here.
Board Member Nishioka.
Here.
Board Member Phillips.
Here.
Board Member Gwen.
Here.
Board Member Gonzalez.
Here.
Board Member Hoy.
Here.
Board Member Nordike.
Here.
Board Member Varney.
Here.
Chair Hoy.
Here. Councilor Stapleton, do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Not tonight.
All right. We do have one person signed up for public comment online, Ian Llewellyn. Please turn your camera on. You have 3 minutes to introduce yourself for the record, please, with your address or your ward.
Yeah, good evening. I apologize. I can't get my camera to work. Hopefully it'll pop on here.
That's all right.
Apologies. Yeah, but good evening. Thank you for having me. I understand you guys have a busy evening, so I'll be brief. I'm with Deacon Development, 901 Northeast Gleason Street in Portland, Oregon. We're a real estate development company. We've submitted a request for a program exception to the maximum grant amount allowed under the Urban Renewal Area Capital Grant Improvement Grant Program. And I understand you'll be considering that request this evening. So I just wanted to briefly highlight the proposed project that we have in. The existing site of the proposed project has been used as a parking lot for many years. It's at 277 High Street in downtown Salem. And then before it was used as a parking lot, it was actually the old Salem City Hall and was demolished in 1972. So it kind of has an interesting history, and we're hoping to tap into that history as we kind of develop and refine the development plan moving forward. We spent several months meeting with our consultants and local experts in Salem to make sure we were really bringing to market what the demand and what the need is for downtown housing. So the current plan is to replace the existing parking lot with a new 6-story mixed-use building. The building would include 98 residential living units, and then it would include an additional 7 commercial live-work units that would have a street front access along the public sidewalks at High Street and Chemeketa Street. And then although it's not a requirement, as I understand it, for this exception request, our plan is to set aside 16 of the residential living units as affordable home units at the 80% median family income rate for the Salem area. The current building design features a wide variety of unit types and sizes and layouts. They range from a 450 square foot studio to 2-bedroom units that are around 950 square feet in size. So it's really a great coverage in unit types, and this was intentionally done to attract a broad range of demographics and help kind of cultivate diversity within the living community at the building itself and the surrounding properties as well. The building and living community itself will have wonderful amenities. It'll have a resident community room with a connected outdoor deck for community gatherings. There'll be a parcel delivery and storage system. We're planning to have a fitness center, a dog wash, and a pet waste station. And I wanted to note too, there's also will be a strong emphasis on alternative modes of transportation. We're including bike storage, a bike washing station, and then we'll have EV charging stations within the surface parking lot as well. So that's a quick summary of what we have planned. We genuinely believe this project will be a tremendous benefit to downtown Salem. We appreciate your consideration. We're excited about the opportunity, and I'm happy to answer any questions you guys might have.
Thank you, Mr. Llewellyn. Appreciate it. Councilor Nordyke has a question for you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for being with us virtually this evening. I'm a little bit hard of hearing, and I'm hoping you could drill down a little bit more. I believe you said, and our materials indicate, 16 units will be affordable. I think you said 80% of the AMI. Do you mean household AMI, I assume, not individual?
Yeah, I mean, the way we have traditionally done it is based on the type of unit. So I'm not sure I can technically answer that question, but like the AMI rate for a studio in Salem, as I understand it, is $1,172. So that would be the rate for a studio. It's a great question. I'm not sure I have the technical answer, but that's how I understand it at my level, at least.
Go ahead, Councilor.
Sure. And do you know at this point, early on in this process, the units that are going to be affordable, do you intend all 16 to be studio, or is that to be determined?
No, we would allocate that based on the different unit mix. So this project's proposed to have around 20% studios, 55% 1-bedrooms, and 25% 2-bedrooms. So you could use those percentages for how many of the units would be those, those pro rata affordable unit types, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you, and thank you, Councilor Nordyke. You asked a lot of my questions that I had as well. I did have a question about the live-work situation. Is that, the way I understand it, having not seen plans for this, is that there would be some storefront in the front of the space and then living in the back. And am I correct on that?
You are, yep, that's
Okay,
100% correct.
Great.
Yep.
I don't know if we have any of these in Salem right now or downtown. That would be really interesting to hear, but this is a very exciting, this portion of it. And I would just encourage you to include at least one of these as also affordable when you're looking at the different units that are going to be considered for affordability, because I think that would be an interesting and important part to include. But other than that, I don't have any questions, and I'm excited about this project.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other additional questions for Mr. Llewellyn? All right, thank you for your testimony.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Councillor Stapleton, do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
No, but you already asked me that.
I did, sorry, I went backwards on the above public comment. Sorry, consent calendar, Councillor.
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Second.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Phillips. Councillor, to your motion.
Thank you. Tonight we have item 3.1A, the October 23rd, 2023 draft urban renewal agency minutes, and item 3.3A, the Riverfront Downtown Urban Renewal Capital Improvement Grant Program exception for Deacon Development LLC. And that concludes the consent calendar.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Board Member Nordike.
Aye.
Board Member Varney.
Aye.
Board Member Stapleton. Board Member Nishioka.
Aye.
Board Member Phillips.
Aye.
Board Member Gwynn.
Aye.
Board Member Gonzalez.
Aye.
Board Member Hoy.
Aye.
Chair Hoy.
Aye, motion passes. I'm really excited about that project. I think it's going to be a really great addition to our downtown. It meets a lot of our council goals, so that's exciting. We have no public hearings. We have no special orders of business. We do have an information report. Does anybody have any questions on item 6A? I see Ms. Rutherford has joined us. Did you have anything for us?
I can answer the AMI question if you would
Great.
like. Yes. So AMI, when it comes to affordable rent, is typically based on household size. So if you're a household of one, then the rents are based on the AMI for a household of one. If it's a household of two, then that continues. So it varies depending on household size.
Thank you. Is Councilor Nishioka?
Thank you. I have a question. It's about affordability as well.
Okay.
So can you tell me how long the affordable units would be in effect?
So in this situation, because affordability is not a requirement of the grant exception, there is no timeline associated with that. However, I think it's a reasonable expectation that this developer may come forward with a request for the MUTIP tax exemption program, that 10-year tax exemption. And in that case, or if they seek SDC waivers, the affordability period would be, prorated or tied to the MUTIP timeline. So it's likely if they pursue the MUTIP exemption that we're looking at a 10-year period, potentially longer.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? All right, thank you. We are adjourned. And I will call to order the meeting of the Salem City Council for Monday, November 27th, 2023. If the recorder please call the roll.
Councillor Stapleton.
Here.
Councillor Nishioka.
Here?
Councillor Phillips.
Here.
Councillor Gwynn.
Here.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Here.
Councillor Hoy.
Here.
Councillor Nordike.
Here.
Councillor Varney.
Here.
Mayor Hoy.
Here. Councilor Stapleton, do we have any additions or deletions to the agenda?
Yes, I move the revisions as an addition to the agenda.
Second.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Phillips. Councilor, to your motion.
Yes, this is just on 6B. We had a change in the ward, a correction from Ward 7 to Ward 4.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councillor Phillips.
Aye.
Councillor Gwynn.
Aye.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Councillor Hoy.
Aye.
Councillor Nordike. Councillor Varney.
Aye.
Councillor Stapleton.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. All right. It is now time for council and city manager comments. I would just like to start off by letting everybody know I had the opportunity to have dinner with the Siletz Tribal Council last week and with a number of other tribal leaders from around the region over at the coast. It was a great dinner, and it was a great chance to get to chat with folks and further our relationship. So I did that last week, several days ago. And also just want to remind everybody about the upcoming holiday parade this Friday downtown, 6 p.m. I believe it is. It's going to be a great time, although I'm not sure the weather is going to be as wonderful as it was last year based on the forecast, but we'll see. So I hope everybody comes down. Other comments? Councilor Nordyke.
Hi. Thank you. I was just muttering under my breath, I will not permit the weather to be poor during
Noted.
our holiday parade.
It is not
have
allowed.
a talk with the people in charge.
All right.
No, I was just going to second that. I want to thank the Salem Main Street Association, all the other parade organizers and volunteers. Last year, we drew 7,000 people or so, and many of us participated in the parade, and I will be proudly marching in that parade again, rain or shine, and I am super looking forward to that. I would also encourage folks who are watching at home to please watch our very brief but eventful URA meeting tonight. We have approved grant funds towards the creation of a parking lot in downtown, which is really underutilizing downtown real estate. We want our downtown to be vibrant, accessible, and just a wonderful place to work and live. And this is another step in that direction. And this council really should be commended. Yes, I'm patting myself on the back, but also you too, for all the votes we have taken of lately. You can truly see the difference. The Rivenwood apartments will have workforce development housing downtown. The Holman Hotel added an extra 60 jobs to downtown. And there's a lot more underway as well. So take a look at the URA meeting earlier tonight. We are making exciting progress towards converting yet another vacant or underutilized piece of property into mixed use and apartment living downtown and live-work living downtown. So I'm super excited. We unanimously passed that. So that's all very, very good news. So looking forward to seeing more of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Additional comments? Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, it's been another eventful couple of weeks in Northeast Salem, and I was visiting with a friend last night who lives in West, and we hadn't had a chance to visit for a long time since COVID hit. We both agree that things are just so different in Salem over the last 3 years. My friend and his little family bike as often as they can from home to work and school and work and home and back again and again. His daughter, under 10, is in therapy because of bad experiences that they have had riding bikes in Salem with people in crisis, no matter what their circumstances may be. She's been frightened to the point of needing help. And I would be willing to bet that she's not alone. And if this little one doesn't feel safe riding or walking in Salem, then we're just not doing our job. And I want everyone to feel safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Further comments? Mr. Staley.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. Just very quickly, today we received notification from our friends at Bloomberg Harvard City Leadership Initiative that we have been awarded a summer intern from Harvard University. They will be working with Krishna on a data, let's see here, it says In Salem, services to customers are currently department-centric rather than customer-centric. The information available to them, including data on infrastructure, services, policies, and community events, is likely to be dispersed across various systems. To improve, the city should conduct an audit to categorize information and identify where it's stored. A comparative analysis in other cities can reveal areas where the city lags in terms of technology adoption, communication strategies, and community engagement. So thank you to Krishna for putting that application together, and we look forward to those results later this year. But we should have a intern joining us sometime this summer, so stay tuned. And congratulations, Krishna.
Thank you. Additional comments? All right. We have no proclamations or presentations. We are on to public comment. As a reminder, we'll have you step up to the microphone when your name is called, introduce yourself and your address or your ward for the record. When the yellow light comes on, that means you have a minute left. When the red light comes on, that means your time is up. Please stop your comments at that time. First up, we have Kelly Thomas. Please hit that button for me and turn that microphone on. There you go.
All right.
Thank you.
Hi, Mayor, Councilors. I'm Kelly Thomas on Braze in Ward 1. I've got 30 years of experience in the built environment, managed projects up to $1.1 billion, got a background in city planning, state policy. I'm really passionate about finding some progressive solutions to the budget issue, and as such, I submitted an application to fill the vacant budget committee for Ward 1. I'm also interested in serving on the Revenue Task Force, should one be appointed. I've already served on the HLC and the top boards. But now, let's assume that the Revenue Task Force is necessary. I really think it should be renamed and rescoped, because it implies that only revenue will be considered, where reductions in spending can and should be also considered. A more well-rounded approach to spending levels, projections, and progressive revenue sources would be more appropriate under a Resilient Salem Funding Task Force or something similarly named, because a silver revenue bullet is not going to solve the problem, but maybe 1,000 silver BBs might. This would also further justify the $210,000 proposed to carry out these efforts. This, of course, assumes that the city has done the projections correctly. As Councilor Hoy pointed out at the August 28th meeting, there was a surplus in 2022, and also in 2023, it appears there's going to be a surplus. I noted in the budget that the general fund balance has grown from 2013 at 20 million, 20.8 to the 40.7 million now, so it's almost doubled. Part of that's because of the grants that are anomalies, but the city should look into continuing grant efforts, and then relative to the fiscal 2024 budget, we're showing a $9.5 million deficit, which is a 6.2% increase in spending, while there's just 2.5% in revenues, which includes your city operations fee of 5.6 and additional property tax revenues. But one thing I looked at, I printed the entire budget out, all 650 pages. Expenditure increase in salaries and human resources is $14 million increase for 38 FTEs. So that's $368,000 per FTE, or if you take all 809 FTEs and divide by the total personnel services, it's $177,000. So that's just kind of like a red flag. Maybe there's some more investigation that needs to be done there. I've also noticed that the growth in FTEs grew 14, almost 15%. Since 2018, where Salem's population grew 13% since 2013. So more growth in FTEs, which, I did look at the FTEs per thousand. I did check out to the letter that was submitted on March 3rd, but I couldn't verify the 2008. So just again, something that pops up that needed to be looked at further. Is it over already?
Yeah, your time's up.
Oh, okay. All right. Thanks. Well,
We did receive your written testimony.
What's that?
We did receive your written testimony.
Oh, yes, and I received it. So that's basically what I was trying to summarize in 3 minutes. Almost made it. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll consider some of the options in here. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Roger Bell.
Hello there. Hi, I'm Roger Bell, Ward 4. I'm talking in reference to item 7.2 on your agenda. It's Ordinance Bill 7-23. I did send detailed comments to the City Council via the City Recorder, so I won't repeat them, as it would take more than 3 minutes. I will say that the Planning Commission has interpreted House Bill 3395 overzealously when applying it to single-room occupancy. Salem has zoning that permits single-room occupancy in the majority of areas that permit single-family dwellings, 15 out of 20 areas. House Bill 3395 only requires, and I quote, "Within an urban growth boundary, each local government shall allow the development of a single-room occupancy." Salem meets that criteria, so no further action is actually required. Furthermore, these proposed changes do not meet the criteria in SRC 110.085 sub B sub 1, requiring that an amendment to the UDC is in the best interest of the public health, safety, and welfare of the city. Therefore, I believe it is the duty of this council to refer this ordinance bill back to the Planning Commission with the direction that they remove the proposed code changes that would permit single-room occupancy within the SRC Title 10, Chapters 510, 511, 531, 532, and 533, as these changes would be detrimental to those neighborhoods where room and board is not permitted per the current SRC Title 10. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Council, without objection, we do have a person signed up under item number 8. I would like to call them forward at this point so they don't have to stay for the whole meeting. We just have one person. Any objection? No. So we'll call up Tim Cowan.
Mayor, City Council, for the record, my name is Tim Cowan. And I'd first like to pass on a compliment. There was a gentleman with the I wrote it down even, Public Works Dispatch. His name was Cody, and he was perfect. He not only answered the questions, but he was extremely professional, and he represented the city very well. On to payroll tax. It was the first time I ever held up a sign at intersections. I had never done that before. I even counted cars at the lights to find out when it was time just to leave. I'd spend between 2 and 4 hours a day. And I think I probably saw maybe a couple thousand, maybe 3,000 people at a time. The reason why I say that is because I feel a responsibility to the people who voted against the payroll tax to actually help with coming up with solutions for it. I mean, why is that a good decision? And some of the testimony that people have made just recently, I think they have some good suggestions. I have a trademark, the Citizens Lobbyist, and I go to the state, spend most of my time at the state capitol, and testify. I'm not associated with a political party or any special interest group, so I don't have to register as a lobbyist. So I go there and help support them with their decisions and getting information and writing their legislation. I would donate my time to help with a budget, and I would also like to throw into that I'll work also with the state and take the connections I've developed over time to go to the legislatures, the political parties, and so on, department heads, to see if there are revenue sources that we might be able to use, get access to. So I'll do that also. The last thing I'd like to do is I wanted to pass on a compliment to you and to the mayor. On Friday, January 24th, Statesman Journal, the title was "Gun Violence Report Paints a Crime Trend." There was an officer at the Oregon Corrections Prison who was attacked by a gang of 8 by the bus depot. And I like the fact that you're putting together a group. Then the mayor commented on that, to take a look at coming up with solutions on why we have those issues pending right now. I don't know how you feel about it, but downtown Salem at night, I don't know that I like to go down there by myself too often, especially when I was holding the sign. It was a little tricky, I think, at times. Mayor, that's all I have.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. All right, Councilor Stapleton, we're on to the consent calendar.
Thank you. I move the consent calendar with the exception of item 3.2A pulled by Councilor Varney.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Nishioka. Councilor, to your motion?
Yes. Tonight we have item 3.1A, the November 13th, 2023 draft city council minutes. Item 3.2B, an update to the National Hazards Mitigation Plan. Item 3.3A, the purchase and sale agreement with East Park LLC for the acquisition of a 6.63 acre future park property. And item 3.3B, the purchase and sale agreement with Beckwith Family Trust for acquisition of property related to the Sheldon Ditch Improvement Project. And that concludes, Councilor Nishioka is very excited about that last one. That concludes the consent calendar.
Thank you, Councilor. Is there further discussion? Councilor Hoy.
Was the purchase of the park property in that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, can we
Yes.
discuss that, or?
Would you like to pull it? Or do you have a long discussion or just a comment? If you have a discussion, we should pull it.
Could I pull it? Sorry about that.
Yes. No, it's fine. Do we need an amended motion, or since we're already in discussion?
It's under action.
Okay. So we'll just pull that one. We're good. The city attorney says we're good to have that one pulled, so we'll put that down on item number 5. So that is item number 3.3A. We will move to item 5.
Thank you.
So, and is there any further discussion on the consent calendar as amended? So just for the record, we are voting on everything except 3.2A and 3.3A. Councilor Nishioka.
Can I just say, I'm very excited about the Shelton Ditch being able to move forward. It's been a long time coming.
You may.
Thank you for all your good work.
Every ditch needs a champion. And you are Shelton's. Is there further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Phillips.
Aye.
Counselor Gwynn.
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Counselor Nordike.
Aye.
Counselor Varney.
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton.
Aye.
Counselor Nishioka.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. All right, we are on to item 4A. We have public hearings now.
The Salem City Council will now conduct a public hearing to consider exemption from competitive bidding process and authorization of an alternative contracting method for the Willow Lake Water Pollution Control Facility North Primary Anaerobic Digesters number 1 and 2. The hearing will begin with a staff presentation, followed by other interested persons. Individuals testifying are limited to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know you told us your name last time, and I apologize. I did not retain it.
Good afternoon, Mayor Hoy, City Council members. My name is James Winslow, Assistant City Engineer in the Public Works Engineering Department. Thank you for having me here tonight. Tonight before you is a request for approval to exempt, as a local contract review board, to exempt the city from the standard competitive bidding process, affectionately known as design bid build, and allow the alternative competitive contracting method known as construction manager general contractor, CMGC, for the Willow Lake Anaerobic Digester 1 and 2 project. What is our anaerobic digester project? Out at Willow Lake, we have these 2 primary anaerobic digesters. They aid in the wastewater treatment process by taking the sludge, the anaerobic bacteria, convert that to digester gas, and that aids in being able to use that gas in the rest of the plant. The digesters were built in 1964 and put into construction or into service. They have been maintained and with maintenance and repairs throughout the years, but they're at the point where significant repairs need to happen. On the left is your digester 2 or 1, and on the right is digester 2. The significant items out there really are the roof. From the digester gas on the inside has caused a lot of the concrete and interior coating to have some significant failures. And so our initial inspections say about 40%. This project will do interior coating, or more inspection, repairs to that concrete, resealing and coating of the interior and the exterior. The digesters are about 33 feet in height, 16 foot below ground and about 16 foot above ground, and they're about 35 feet in diameter. So they're pretty significant size. So why were we asking for the exemption to go from the standard method to the alternative competitive method? It allows the city really to engage the contractor early on a complex project and advance the schedule. Bringing the contractor in early allows us to really streamline that process. They have more input on the design. They can really look at the constructability. Allows them to work together more closely as opposed to the standard process of here's the designer, here's the plans, and then the contractor bids on that information. So that teamwork, that collaboration early just allows for a better product. It reduces the schedule in theory. It should, faster delivery. We still have local participation. All the local contractors that are qualified can bid on that. We do have a number in the area. We have used this method a number of times already. And what we get to is after the contractor has worked with the designer and they've come up with the repairs, they put together a guaranteed maximum price, and that is the process where we negotiate on here's what the cost would be. And that by that process, it reduces the construction change orders that typically happen in a design bid build process. Again, one of the other big changes here, if you look at the image on the screen on the left, most design bid build is based on price, right? Lowest bid wins the contract. The alternative method allows us to select not just on price, but also on what are the contractor's qualifications, right? What is their prior experience? What is their approach to the project? How are they going to collaborate? How are they going to speed up the work? What are they going to do to have some cost savings, some efficiency? So it's a method that is really efficient for us for these really complex projects that also have time constraints. And the one reason why we have time constraints is we want our digesters, we have a window where we can take them out of service to do the final inspection. They got to be cleaned. They got to be in final inspection to see what the real final issues are, and then the repairs can be done. We really need that done over the summertime. So a short window. What does the milestone and our schedule look like? We have our construction design team on board already. It's Tetra Tech. We're working to put out, once we receive council approval, assuming we do, we put out the RFP for selecting the CMGC contractor. After the interviews and the scoring, they should be on board in early spring, late winter, early spring of 2024. We'd finalize the design, get the guaranteed maximum price in place, and then the repairs to the digester number 2 in the summer of 24. Put that into service for the year, and then next summer start on the construction for digester number 1. So in summary, again, the benefits is engaging the contractor early. We would reduce the time. It allows us to transfer the risk. I know it's reduce the risk, but really we're transferring the risk to the team. Again, and that also helps to reduce the change orders because the contractor goes in with a better understanding early on of the entire project and scope as opposed to having the contract documents with a design bid build. So we feel this is the best approach for a complex project out at Willow Lake and are seeking your approval for exemption from the standard process to the alternative competitive process. And with that, I would take any questions.
Thank you. We have nobody signed up for a public comment, so we can go ahead and go to questions for staff. Other questions? Councilor Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor Hoy, and thank you again, James, for your detailed report. I recently got a chance to go out to our wastewater facilities and get a good tour of that site, and I think that it's impressive how much of a regional commitment there's been to having safe water here, drinking water in our community. I support this, to the core of my being, but I want to ask a question to kind of make it a bit more simple. in terms of the question that we're confronted with here. Have other big projects or substantial projects used this exemption or the alternative process? And I think you've done a good job of like outlining the summary, but when have we done this before?
Appreciate the question. I did miss that in my presentation. We've used this project process of CMGC out for Guerin Island for the ozone project, for the Southeast Collector well, and for filter number 2. We've also used it on the police station facility. So we've also used other alternative delivery processes as design build for operations and civic center. So there's a number of alternative methods, whether it's a progressive design build or CMGC, that council has approved and we have implemented over the years.
Thank you for that. It feels like, being on this side of things, that this is kind of becoming the normal, to go this way. Even though it's an exception, it seems like it's kind of better than the standard.
Yes, I've had conversations with our city engineer, Alan Danning, and projects at complex facilities such as Willow Lake and Guerin Island, our water treatment plant, and Willow Lake, our water pollution control facility, have such complex processes that engaging the contractor early is really more than likely, it's going to be a cost savings, because we have the more of the unknowns going in at the beginning. With design bid build, as I mentioned, you have more change order opportunity with the unknowns that the contractor will ask for that contingency to cover those costs that they did not know going into it. So having that collaboration early on does help to identify the guaranteed maximum price. We know what the full price will be going in, correct?
Any further questions? Councilor Gwynn.
So you indicated that there are local contractors who have experience. And so I just wondered if we give any, I don't want to say preference, but I guess I do want to know, do we give preference to local folks who live and work here in Salem? Because I personally would like to see that.
I'm going to boot this to
Dan
the works
Atchison,
director.
City Attorney. I think I can handle that. So under state law, we're not allowed to give local preference points. There are statutory preferences for disadvantaged business employers, but not for local City of Salem sort of preferences.
Further questions? All right, thank you. We'll close the public hearing. Councilor Stapleton, do you have a motion?
Thank you. I move that we adopt resolution number 2023-33 in support of an exemption from the competitive bidding process and use of a CMGC contracting method for the Willow Lake Water Treatment Facility Anaerobic Digesters number 1 and 2 rehabilitation project.
Second.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Phillips. Councilor, to your motion.
Thank you. I was really excited to see this on our agenda and on staff's to-do list. Again, I think all of us have gotten that amazing tour of our waste treatment facility and have met the staff there. I can see them in the back row here. And it really is just a phenomenal place to visit and understand. And I think investment in our water system is always a good bet. And I understand the complexities of a situation like this and understand that it would be very, very helpful to have somebody there with you the whole time and having the contractor on board early. So I support this. I hope you all do as well.
Thank you, Councilor. Further discussion? Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you. I just want to say that I agree and feel that because you have such a short window to do the work, it's really critical to make sure that everything is lined up because we don't want to have to stop and stop again. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Gwynn.
Aye.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Councillor Hoy.
Aye.
Councillor Nordyke.
Aye.
Councillor Varney.
Aye.
Councillor Stapleton.
Aye.
Councillor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councillor Phillips.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. All right, on to item 4B.
The City Council will now hold a public hearing regarding case number CA 23-04, proposed amendment to the Salem Transportation System Plan to reclassify Landaggard Drive Northwest as a local street and extend Colorado Drive Northwest east as a collector street to connect with Dokes Ferry Road Northwest. The criteria applicable to the proposed amendment is SRC 64.020F2. Testimony must be directed toward the identified criteria or other criteria the person believes to apply to the decision. The hearing will be conducted with staff presentation first, followed by other interested persons. Neighborhood associations are limited to 5 minutes per association, and individuals testifying are limited to 3 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. No worries. We're going to just take a quick technical pause.
While he finds the presentation, I can start at least by saying good evening, Mayor and City Councilors. My name is Julie Hanson. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the Public Works Department, and I'm seeing various presentations pop up in front of me. Do I need to do something? Oh. Do I need to do something else? Sure. Sure. Okay. Thanks. Actually, I think I might need some help.
Okay.
Humming, tap dancing, nothing? All right.
Okay, I think we're getting there.
That is very tiny.
It is. Let's see. Are you driving or am I? I am. Okay, I'm going to stop driving.
Dueling mice.
It's a pretty short presentation, so. Could you go to the first slide?
I think we want to go to presentation mode.
Presentation mode. Okay.
It's the button right there next to that slider.
We getting there? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and start to say, I want to start by entering the staff report and this presentation into the record. Tonight, we're here for a public hearing on the Salem Transportation System Plan. This is an amendment very specifically related to the alignment of a future collector street in West Salem in the area of Orchard Heights and Dokes Ferry Road. It's okay. Part of me wants to drive, but then I'm scared that I'll mess it up even more.
What do you want the next slide?
I just want, can you go into presentation mode?
Yeah, I'm looking for.
It's the button right there next to the slider in the bottom right-hand corner.
There you go. That should do it.
There we go.
Okay, great. Okay, now I'm going to drive. So currently in the transportation system plan, the very small map on the left there shows the alignment of a collector street alignment in West Salem that travels from Orchard Heights and then loops back around to Orchard Heights again, using Landaggard Drive Northwest, which is a currently under-improved street that was built when it was outside the city limits. With this amendment, the collector street alignment would instead shift and sort of curve over to connect to Dokes Ferry instead of connecting directly to Orchard Heights. Therefore, Landaggard would become a local street. So this map is in your staff report. I realize it's also hard to read here, but this is trying to zoom in a little bit, and I guess my mouse, maybe my mouse will show. So the green dash that you see through here is Landaggard Street as it exists, as well as a potential extension of it. And my mouse is not going to cooperate. So that's in green. So that is currently in the transportation plan shown as both as a collector street and a future collector. That would become a local street. The orange line where it goes from Dokes Ferry on the right, and then it goes up to that new street, that would become a collector street. And then to the left or west and north is already in the transportation system plan as a future collector street connecting up to Colorado Way or Drive. I'm not sure exactly which one is correct. So this is considered a minor amendment to the comprehensive plan, and the criteria for a minor amendment are included in code, as you can see referenced there. It's a legislative land use decision, and findings addressing the criteria are included in the staff report and in the ordinance bill before you tonight. So this is really a pretty limited amendment, but it's related somewhat to the Titan Hill subdivision, and so I wanted to just talk briefly about that because I know that there's been some questions around there. So as part of the consolidated land use application for the development in that quadrant, the extension of Colorado Drive, with or without that name, an alignment was approved. The subdivision was done in a way that there were conditions included that would be applied if council approves this amendment tonight as a collector, or if it remains as a local street. So the subdivision approval decision goes forward whether this TSP amendment is approved or not. And that's important because it's not really good practice to approve something conditioned upon a council decision that has yet to happen. So instead, there was an approval that basically said, okay, if the council decision is this way, you go this path. If it's the other way, then you go this path. The key difference between the two is that if this amendment is not approved, then the street would remain local going over to Dokes Ferry. It would be constructed with sidewalks, but without bike lanes. If it becomes a collector street, it would be constructed with sidewalks and with bike lanes. There have been a number of questions about the grade of the street, and as a local street, there would not, is my understanding, that there would not need to have been an adjustment to the grade, but if it's a collector street, there was an adjustment that was required and that was included in that approval process. And that is because our code has a standard of 8% as a maximum grade for collector streets. This street, because of the topography in the area, I believe goes up to about 12%. So the question was, do we have other collector streets around town that have similar topography issues or similar grades? And the answer is yes, we do, particularly in West Salem and in South Salem. The topography basically doesn't allow us to meet those standards, and for that reason, we have the ability to get an alternative street standard approved. As some examples, Christina Street in West Salem is about 12% in places, and that is a collector street. A portion of Michigan City Lane, similarly, is about 12%. Titan Drive in West Salem as a collector actually exceeds 12% in some places. And then it's important to note that Dokes Ferry, north of Orchard Heights, which is a major arterial fronting this site, actually is about 12% in this area, and the standard for major arterial is actually less. It's at 6%. Another example not in West Salem is Lone Oak, is a collector street in South Salem that exceeds that 8% standard. So with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you. We do have members of the public signed up for comment. I think we'll go to them first, and then we'll come back for questions.
Okay, great, thanks.
First up, we have online Joaquin Lara Midkiff. As a reminder, I'd like you to introduce your name, either your address or your ward. You have 3 minutes to testify. Go ahead.
Am I heard?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor and councilors, good evening. For the record, my name is Joaquin Lara Mirkif, and I'm a resident.
Could I ask you to pause for just one moment? I apologize.
Please.
Could we get the volume adjusted? That's pretty difficult to hear here in the room. Is there any way to adjust the volume up?
Is this better?
No. All right, looks like if you could just be sure and speak clearly and as loudly as possible, that would be fantastic. And we'll start your clock over again.
All right, I'll lift my mic up. That might
Perfect,
help.
thank you.
Mr. Mayor and councilors, good evening. For the record, my name is Joaquin Lara Mirkif, and I'm a resident of Ward 8. And I appear tonight to join the WSNA and speak to the inaccessibility of Colorado Drive and the proposed TSP amendment that bounds the Titan Health development. Earlier this year in late July, when I provided testimony arguing against the approval of the development of the area, I suggested that while every development has its challenges, and West Salem certainly has many topographical ones, as was just alluded to, this site and this area in particular was especially ill-prepared to meet the needs of the area's disabled residents. I spoke to the hazards of the 2 major roadways that bound the development and attested to the reality that disabled and aging residents would face. For example, being unable to meaningfully access the beautiful parks and nature for which West Salem is known, including notably Straub Nature Park, which is literally across on Dokes Ferry. And this is not to mention the ability of residents to access the nearby West Salem High School and other local schools. In July, I wrote that while residents of the development might in theory have access to their living facilities, in practice, their access to life is significantly curtailed. At the time, city officials said that bringing the streets into compliance would cost millions and was not tenable. The sole saving grace this last summer was the sitting applicant's stated commitment to ensuring that accessibility minimums would be met within the development. Colorado Drive will be used heavily by residents. Should this amendment move forward, as it appears tonight, with an unlawful 12% grade, despite examples of other grades around the area, the city would be permitting a double disservice to our elderly and disabled residents in an already challenging area. As a wheelchair user, understand that the difference between an 8% and 12% grade is not just inconvenient, but burdensome, unnavigable, and outside of the law. The city's commitment to connecting roads and making living easier for residents is vital, but it's an ethos that must be extended to everyone. For our disabled community, and for the sake of promoting equal access to life and living for all Salemites, regardless of background, I ask that council direct staff to return a new collector alignment that brings this amendment and development into federal and SRC compliance. Thank you for your engagement tonight.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up, we have James Pavelek. Okay.
Okay, it's green, so I must be on.
You're good.
So I'm Jim Pavlik. So Mayor and City Council, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I actually represent the Homeowners Association. So
Your address or your ward, please?
I guess, what
8.
ward are we in, Chris?
8.
So we represent the Homeowners Association on Colorado Drive.
Okay.
So right there in West Salem. So I personally have lived on Colorado Drive for over 20 years. Like I said, it should be 5 minutes. Sorry, I've got a few things to go, right?
You're not with the neighborhood association. So
Yes, I am.
You said you're with the homeowners association. That's not the neighborhood association.
Okay, I represent two homeowners association. Okay, all right.
It's still 3 minutes.
Got it. So I will speak fast. So definitely, there is a great issue. Living on Colorado for over 20 years, I can tell you that we've had mail service issues where they can't even get up the street. We've had to clear the roads ourselves because we're in Polk County. When there's ice or snow, there's a big issue. But I have several things I would like to discuss. Regarding Colorado as a connector street. First of all, the traffic is going the opposite direction of where people are going to be going to. It takes you west versus east. Landaggard is only, there's 2 places where Landaggard can connect to Dokes Ferry. One is 132 feet, one's 189 feet. To go all the way to Colorado up to Orchard Heights, that adds about 2 miles to get back to Landaggard or Dokes Ferry each way. So just going through some of the calculations, with 436 dwellings in the proposed development, 2 vehicles average 2.5 miles per day. That adds to about 4,400 miles per day. 128,000 miles per month, or over 1.5 million miles per year. This number certainly could go up by 5 to 10%, considering delivery or service vehicles. Obviously, unnecessary consumption of fuel. And I'm just going to give you some stats here. It's going to add to the carbon footprint. So with about 6,400 gallons, it would add carbon footprint of about 122,000 pounds per year just by going to Colorado in the wrong direction of where traffic is going. I say I don't have a lot of time here, so I do have this copy that I'd like to submit to the City Council, but where we are located, we're part of residential agricultural zoning. We are not zoned for development. In fact, the properties are deeded, not allowing us to develop. So we are basically stuck with our property. So
I apologize,
versus
sir,
heading
but your
east,
time has expired.
that's okay. So how can I make sure that the city? I've got 3 pages.
If you could just hand that to Ms. Hanson, the person right behind you, and she'll make sure
Could I
that
email it to you? Is it possible?
You certainly can. We're not going to see it before we make our decision, assuming we make a decision tonight, but you're certainly welcome
So
to.
I'll give you this. There's a few but honestly, excuse me, but I do have an email copy that I'd like to send to you, but
Thank you.
there's a lot of information.
Next up is Steve Anderson.
Is the decision to be made tonight? No. There's 3 options, right? Colorado would be one of them, 2 of them.
Let him bring that up first.
I'm sorry?
He's bringing up a slide for you.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, we on? Yes. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Steve Anderson, Ward 8, West Salem Neighborhoods Association, here tonight by assignment. You have this in your packet, but tonight we've reviewed the application and we support Colorado Drive as a collector street. We think that that's necessary for this subdivision and connecting our community. And we don't care or object to it either going to Dokes Ferry or Orchard Heights as long as it maintains the 8% and the ADA rules. One of the key points is this second point, which Julie shared with you. During the Titan Hill development, Colorado Drive was approved as a 12% grade. And now it's, we're looking at that. And one of the key issues in that approval was the criteria for alternative street criteria. I'll talk about that later, but the issue is it impossible to have another alternative? We do believe that there are other alternatives, and we'd ask council to request that staff postpone this further until they can come back with an alignment in this neighborhood that meets the 8% grade and ADA requirements in the code. Next slide, please. As I said, there are, next slide.
He's asking for the next slide.
Next slide. And you speak up, excuse me. Yeah, okay. So there are no findings in the current staff report that show that these specific rules in the code that need to be applied. The bottom one, SRC 803, refers to the granting of an alternate street standard as it has to show that it's impossible. We offer two possible scenarios of an 8% slope in this area that would achieve this requirement. So 8% is possible in this neighborhood. We'll demonstrate these alignments are possible in the next couple slides. Next slide, please. If you look at the one on the left, it shows an 8% alignment in the dotted red line that comes down and joins Stokes Ferry. It's a little different than the other one. Have 5 minutes, do I not?
Yes,
Okay.
You're going to have an additional 2 minutes.
All right, I'll keep it. I'll make it quick, because I only have 2 slides. On the right, you see a blue line, dotted line that comes down that connects to Orchard Heights. Both these alignments are at an 8% grade and slope and meet the ADA requirements. So we show that the impossible criteria of the current standard can not be met. It is possible to have an alignment in this neighborhood that meets the ADA requirements. So next slide, please. So in conclusion, we would just like an instruction from council to staff to return a new collector alignment here that meets the requirements of the Salem Code and the ADA rules. We've shown that it's possible. We believe it's possible, and we'd love to work with staff to achieve this and make their job easier. We proposed that the current one right now, as proposed to you, does not meet the rules and is not lawful. We have a high school, a middle school, and an elementary school within a half mile of this location, which would mean for 436 units, we're going to have children in that area, including people that are have disability. So we're asking for a safe, reliable pedestrian movement in our community for our children and community. Current proposal does not meet that. We think that there is an alternative out there, and we'd ask that council instruct staff to take a look at that. And that's it. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Anderson. Next up, we have E.M. Easterly.
Good evening. I'm E.M. Easterly from Ward 8. Thank you, Mayor Hoy and members of the council. Over the last month, I have submitted 16 pages of graphic and written testimony, challenging the assumptions and the draft findings presented by staff in anticipation of this public hearing. This morning, I added another 6 pages responding to the staff report found at 23-431 under file text. In summary, the proposal before you cannot be lawfully adopted without an update to those findings. My testimony focuses on 3 topics. I question the staff assumption that a transportation system plan map has policy priority over the written text of a transportation system plan. 2, I question the assumption that the Public Works Director has authority to redefine collector street standards, A, without providing evidence that supports his or her decision, or B, by declaring difficult to be the equivalent of either impossible or undesirable without providing an explanation or justification. I question how a roadway with an approved 1 to 8.2 grade ratio can meet the federal ADA sidewalk requirements of 1 to 12 slope ratio standard. Councilors, we do not live in the land of Oz with magical witches and a wizard, and you are not a band of flying monkeys. We live in a Salem, and you are the city council policy body responsible for our city's legal decisions, not city staff. Accordingly, I request that the council keep the hearing record open to allow staff to revise a legally incomplete staff report. I ask you to suspend your final ordinance bill 1523 decision until staff has provided you with a finding that meet the city's detailed transportation system plan requirements, the Salem Revised Code obligations, and all federal and state requirements cited in my written testimony. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you, Mr. Easterly. Are there any questions for Mr. Easterly? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
We will return to staff questions. Do we have any questions for staff? Yeah. I'll start. Do you have a reaction to the comments that we've heard from the public tonight? Is this an illegal approval, or I'm not sure the exact wording that the various folks use, but does this, if we approve this, would it be violating the ADA and other codes?
No. Sorry. I'm not an attorney, and so I will, turn to your city attorney if he has a different opinion. But in my understanding and talking to the staff who are more involved with development services and with engineering review of ADA requirements, that this is the findings are legal and sufficient.
Could we have somebody maybe who's involved in that design work step up and maybe address the detail of that? I think that would be important first. This is an important point to understand.
I can go ahead and add to Ms. Hansen's comments.
Great. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah. Brian Martin, Public Works Director. We follow what's called the PROWIG, which is the Public Right-of-Way Accessibility Guidelines. And those guidelines do not require street slopes to be the 1 and 12 as was discussed. For ADA compliance, anything greater than 5% slope is actually considered a ramp. And if you're between 5 and 8.33%, you actually have to have landings every 30 inches of vertical height. The guidelines specifically say that you do not have to, if topography is present in a roadway situation, the sidewalks can match the topography of the adjacent area. So while what's being quoted is absolutely correct for sidewalk ramps, ADA ramps, where you see them built at intersections, or for landings that go into buildings, there's nothing in ADA that requires a street slope through topography to have a slope less than 8%.
Thank you, Mr. Martin. Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. I'm really interested to know if there is another alternative design that would work, that would not be 12%. What would happen for that? What would need to happen in order for that to be a reality?
Thank you, Councilor. And I would just add on to that. In addition, would the proposed alternative that the neighborhood association presented, is that viable?
I haven't seen it in great detail. Generally, in order to minimize the slope, you have to add length to the distance. And so it looked like they had arced their alignment, which would make that distance longer, which would decrease the slope. What I don't know is what the curves are. So just like we have standards for vertical grades when we design streets. There's also standards for horizontal curves. So, perhaps the alignment that they have shown meets those horizontal design standards, but I'm not sure that it does without seeing it in greater detail. So potentially there is something there. I know that when we worked with the developer and their engineer was submitting plans, they didn't have anything that they felt could meet that standard.
So I guess maybe an easier way to put this would be, why do you think that the recommendation is the best proposal for the given situation? That's what I would like to understand. I mean, I've read it, I've heard it, but I would just tell us why you think this is the best idea.
I'd be happy for others to chime if need be, but based on the topography of that development, it's on a steep hillside.
Yeah.
There's a lot of considerations that go into effect. So there's a lot of materials that have to be moved in order to develop landing pads for the buildings. There's stormwater requirements that have to be met, drainage needs that have to be calculated. It's much more than just looking at a street alignment. There's all of the building sites and drainage and everything else that goes with the development that all has to come together to determine what the best solution is for a project site. And so, maybe there is a way to get that slope flatter than 12%, but it may make the development improbable or not practicable based on other considerations for grading and drainage and other criteria that needs to be met.
Thank you. Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. Yeah, this one might be for Lisa. I'm not sure. But, what is the process? If we were to say, you know what, can we go back to the drawing board and see if we can find a way to get this collector to be 8%? What happens to the development as it stands right now? I guess I'll stop right there.
Okay, hi, Lisa Anderson Ogilvie, your planning administrator. So you don't get to revisit Titan Hill. It's already been approved by the council and the appeal period is passed. So the street in the location at the grade has been approved and the city cannot revoke that approval. So the council is being asked tonight, should it be a local street or should it be a collector street? And the difference between those two are really bike lanes.
Okay, so there really is no way for us to consider any alternative path for this road?
There's no ability to change the location of the street. If you think it's too steep to be a collector street, then you could keep it as is as a local street. And then the collector would be Landaggard.
Other than the bike lanes, what are the implications of that decision?
Minimal, I guess I would say. The depth of pavement is a little bit deeper on collector streets, so it would be cheaper for the developer if it was a local street.
Parking? We would allow parking on one and not the other, isn't that correct?
Yeah, I believe the recommendation in the Titan Hill decision was for collector B, so it would have parking on one side and a bike lane on the other side.
Okay.
If it stays as a local and there's no bike lane, then it has on-street parking on both sides.
Thank you. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you. If it's a local street, does it still have a sidewalk?
Yes, it will have sidewalks on both sides.
So no matter what decision we make, it'll have sidewalks. Great. I'm here seeing a head nod.
Correct, yes.
Thank you. Further questions?
If I could add, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
When we look at street grades, we have if you look at our standards, it's 6% for arterials, it's 8% for collectors, it's 12% for locals. All streets have to meet ADA, no matter what they are. And so those grades that are given for those different streets are not because of ADA. It's based on traffic and speeds. Those are the criteria that it's really based on. When it comes to meeting ADA, we have to make sure the intersections meet ADA requirements, that they meet those slopes that were referenced are actually they're correct slopes, but not in the application of a long-running roadway. They're correct for ramps only. So if you make a decision to change it to a local street, it's doing nothing different for ADA. All it's doing is you're taking away parking in a bike lane.
And if I might add one other quick thing. if the decision is made to not change it to a collector, so leave Colorado as a local, leave Landaggard as a collector street, there is not a requirement from the development, from this development, and there's not funding set aside to improve Landaggard to a collector street standard at this time. So that would just become another city need.
So what's its current state that we would be leaving it in?
It's basically a under-improved street that was built in Polk County without any city standards, no sidewalks, et cetera.
So if we were to do the alternative, we would be basically taking on that project ourselves for some future bond that might happen at some point in the future, not
Yes.
obviously not with this bond. But,
Correct, and not with this development.
okay. Further questions? Councilor Nishioka.
Just to provide clarity, if we go ahead and agree to what is being recommended, then the developer is going to be responsible for paying for that street. Is this correct?
They're responsible for making the improvements to the collector street standard for Colorado, yes.
Councilor Gwynn.
So then what happens to Landaggard if we move forward with the staff report?
Landaggard would remain as a local street and would also, but would still be in the same condition it's in today. It just would be a local street designation, which does allow it a little bit more options when it comes to some traffic calming, et cetera, but it would not have, sidewalks or anything like that added either.
I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understood the councilor's question. So are you saying that no matter which choice we make, Landaggard isn't getting improved?
Correct.
Okay.
It's just that in one choice, it would be a collector street that's not improved, and another choice, it would be a local street that's not improved.
Staff recommendation is it would be a local street that's not
Correct.
improved. Got it. Thank you. That's helpful. Thank you for that question, Counselor. Other questions? I believe Mr. Atchison has a comment.
Thank you, Dan Atchison, City Attorney. Just wanted to clarify, this is a legislative land use proceeding, so you do have discretion here. Also wanted to note that one of the folks who testified had asked that the hearing be continued or the record be left open. That applies to quasi-judicial applications and hearings. It doesn't apply to legislative, so you're not obligated to hold the record open or continue the hearing, but you can if you want.
Thank you. Are there additional questions for staff? All right, I'll close the public hearing. Councilor Varney, do you have a motion?
I do. Thank you. I move to engross Ordinance Bill 15-23 by adding the following finding to Section 1C of the ordinance bill. The Public Works design standards provide for a maximum 8% grade for collector streets. City Council approved an alternative street standard of up to 12% for the new collector street in the consolidated land use decision for the 6-lot subdivision for Titan Hill Estates and Titan Hill Apartments. While the extension of Colorado Drive Northwest as a collector street meets the applicable criteria, a collector street grade exceeding 8% is not supportive of the goal of serving the mobility and multimodal travel needs of all abilities. And that's the change. And then advance the ordinance bill as engrossed to second reading for enactment.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Varney, second by Stapleton. Councilor, during your support of your comments in support of your motion, it would be really helpful if you were just to restate that in sort of plain language and not in motion form. Like, what is the goal of your motion? Would be, I think, really helpful for folks to understand.
Okay.
Thank you. Go for it.
Thank you. The reason that I wanted to add this to the findings in Section 1C of the ordinance bill
is I wanted to advance the ordinance to second reading because I really appreciate the safety elements of connecting Colorado Drive Northwest down to Dokes Ferry. Things like turning right onto a road rather than left onto Orchard Heights across traffic, moving traffic away from the high school entrance. There are a lot of safety issues that approving this amendment is crucial for. But also I wanted to recognize from testimony, the number of times that I brought it up this summer while we were in that approval process, the challenges that a 12% grade provides. So I wanted to actually state formally that the amendment does not support equity for users with limited mobility because the street grade will exceed the 8% maximum standard for public works design collector streets. Does that make sense?
Thank you, Councilor. That did make sense. So basically, as I understand your motion, you're moving staff recommendation, but with some additional information attached to the findings.
Yes, that's true, that we recognize and acknowledge the challenges that the 12% grade, what it does.
Understood. Thank
Okay.
you. Further discussion. Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. And Councilor Varney, thank you so much for our conversations about this topic over the months. This has been a hard one for both you and I, especially this point, right? The grade issue and the ADA accessibility to this whole development. It has been really hard to kind of come to a compromise there. I just wanted to point out something. Earlier, staff had mentioned that the grade that's set is not for an ADA, and I am just saying this off of my memory, so this is not exactly a quote, but that we base that on the needs of the people in cars. And when they said that, the bells go off in my head. That is what is wrong. Because people in cars are not the only people using our transportation network. And that has been highlighted time and time again through this process. And, I want to be somebody who pushes for change for people in a way that it impacts their life every day. I want to make it so that they are seen and heard, that they feel represented when they're out on our streets. And this doesn't do that, right? This street doesn't do that, and that's really hard to vote on. I think that the first step is acknowledging that it doesn't, and that's why I support your motion, because I think we need to be honest with ourselves and with our community about the fact that, yes, there are a lot of good things with this street, with it being a collector and all of the things that you mentioned. Me, I'm a fan of bike lanes. So all of those things are true, and we are doing a disservice to a certain percentage of our community, and that's hard. The next step for me is to look at how we update our transportation master plan over the next coming years so that we can make that shift. We can make the shift from really just looking at people in cars and what they need, but to look at it from somebody else's perspective who is using our transportation network in a way that really impacts their daily life. So I just wanted to say that those are the things that I want to accomplish in the coming years and in the transportation master plan update. And I recognize that this is not good enough for some people, and I feel that personally, and I that's very hard for me, but I recognize we have to take a vote and move on and then make this system work better for everybody. So that's my commitment.
Thank you, Councilor. Further discussion? Did I see a hand? Sorry. Councilor Nordic.
It was a quick hand. I appreciate the conversation and certainly am supportive of ADA accessible streets, roads, sidewalks, ramps, and so on being built. The staff report says that ADA standards will be met. So I appreciate what these additional findings may do, but as I understand it, the decision's already been made. The grade will be what it is, but it is lawful and in compliance with the ADA. So I don't want you folks to beat yourselves up too much about this because it complies with the ADA. And that's what we've been told. And I trust the experts that we hire who do this work each day, those who know the difference between a 5% and a 5.333% grade, which evidently makes a difference under the rules. So I'm willing to support the addition of findings, but it complies with the ADA. And I think that that's sufficient to move forward, even though it's not the ideal situation that we want. We don't have a choice at this point to amend the grade. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Councilor Phillips.
I think I'm just going to be honest. I appreciate that this has been challenging both now and when it came up previously in the venue of the, I don't know if it was a site plan or a development, but I just don't think I'm tracking what this motion does. So I want to be simple with my questions and acknowledge I may not even have the right wording for getting to what my question is. First, is this amended motion compared to staff recommendation, is there any like substantial difference or practical difference? Would be my first question. And then, or is it just like in the wording and the findings? And I guess, does that have any practical difference? To be completely clear, I think I was, comfortable voting yes on staff recommendation after the thorough questioning of my colleagues who literally nailed all the questions I had and the detailed back and forth from multiple staff members to support it. But I'm just not sure I'm tracking this yet, this amendment. So,
Thank you, Councilor. I'm going to give the city attorney a shot at that, and then I'm going to give the councilor an option to address it too if she chooses.
Thank you, Dan Atchison, City Attorney. So again, this is a legislative decision. We need to have findings in the decision that support the decision. This finding is not exactly supportive of the decision. It more is, I guess, an editorial statement. Just purely from my legal perspective, I just would assume it not be in there because it adds ambiguity. Another thing with legislative decisions is we don't have to pull every little fact and put it into the ordinance itself. We're allowed to pull from the legislative record. So if this decision does get appealed, simply because a finding isn't perfect or isn't in the decision itself, we can still pull from the evidence that's in the record. So from that perspective, I'm okay with this finding, but if I was drafting it, I wouldn't put this finding in the decision because it adds ambiguity.
To the practical question that the councilor mentioned, though, does it change the practical outcome of what's going to happen on that?
It doesn't have any substantive impact, no, is the best way I could phrase it.
Councilor, did you want to weigh in?
Yes, please. It doesn't change it at all. All it adds is that this amendment is not supportive of the goal of serving the mobility and multimodal travel needs of all abilities. Basically, it just adds that sentence to it.
Thank you. Further questions? Or discussion, I should say. Councilor Varney.
Thank you. I wanted to say one more thing, being the counselor in West Salem. West Salem is going to continue to expand and grow, and the majority of land available has pretty steep topography. And so I wanted to bring this forward, especially tonight, and mention this, that as we move forward with plans for development and growth, that we look at alternatives for a lesser slope in order to meet the needs of individuals that have limited mobility, like our seniors and the disabled.
Thank you, Councilor. Further discussion? Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. For the city attorney, the language that you wish wasn't in there, what was that again?
Could I ask Councilor Varney to restate that section of her motion?
Yeah, I'm trying to find it here.
It's an adding to the findings with the sentence she's about to read.
It's basically just the line at the end that is the substantive or not change. It's not of change, but it just says, While the extension of Colorado Drive meets the applicable criteria, it is not supportive of the goal of serving the mobility and multimodal travel needs of all abilities. So it's just recognizing that.
Is that the part that you wish wasn't in there?
That's correct.
And can it be changed?
So what's happening now is the counselor has proposed to advance the ordinance to second reading with this change. Council has an opportunity to further amend this change by making an amendment that's seconded. You'll vote on that amendment, and it goes up or down. You can vote no on this motion, and then a new motion would be presented with or without an amendment. So
If it failed.
If it fails, right. So at this point, procedurally, there's a motion on the table. This motion proposes to advance the ordinance with her proposed change. You can propose a change to that change as a second motion, or you can go forward on this motion and vote yes or no.
Thank you.
Further discussion? Councilor Stapleton.
I propose we take a 5-minute break. Is that okay with everybody?
It works for me.
Thank
We'll take
you.
a 5-minute break. All right, we are back in session. Thank you, everybody. We are currently discussing the motion on the table from Councilor Varney. Is there further discussion? All right. Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Counselor Nordike.
Nay.
Counselor Varney.
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton.
Aye.
Counselor Nishioka.
Aye.
Counselor Phillips.
Aye.
Counselor Gwynn.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye, motion passes. All right, we are on to item 5A, and I'm going to turn it over to our city manager, Mr. Staley, to kick us off.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good evening, members of council, community members. We're here this evening to continue our conversation that we started with you in early August regarding our revenue needs and to receive your feedback and direction about this process that you would like us to use to have this discussion with the community over the next 6 months. I asked Colleen Rosillas, thank you, Colleen, for being here, and her associates from Moss Adams to assist us in this work and to prepare a scope of work for your consideration. City staff will be engaged in next year's budget process from January to June, and we'll also be presenting a revised 2024 budget for your consideration in February of '24. They simply do not have the capacity to directly support this work themselves. Staff has met with Colleen and her team several times to debrief the City Council's October 25th, 2023 work session and other feedback that you have provided. She has crafted a proposal that generally takes this guidance into consideration by attempting to create a process that provides meaningful opportunities for a broad range of community members to be engaged in this 6-month time frame. The process that she will review with you tonight is also intended to yield meaningful feedback that you can use to make decisions about next steps in time to place a measure on the ballot in 2024, should you wish to do so. If you accept this proposal, Colleen and her team will facilitate meetings of the Revenue Task Force, host town hall meetings, coordinate focus groups, and field a community survey to gauge community interest and assess options. They will also evaluate revenue options, analyze key concerns such as compression related to property tax levies. Colleen will also provide you with regular status reports and updates. It is my hope that council will create a strong revenue task force to serve as a connection point with the community and provide critical feedback to Colleen, staff, and council about a path forward. Colleen and her team will facilitate that process too. Colleen will now review the scope of her proposal. Based on your feedback this evening, staff anticipates bringing a budget amendment back for council's consideration at December 4th, 2023 council meeting to fund this work if you want to move forward.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Colleen Rosillas from Moss Adams, and I am too short to see the screen fully, so just give me a second to share my presentation. All right, we have a short presentation this evening to walk you through Revenue Task Force and what this work would look like, probably starting as soon as we possibly could next month and getting done by the end of June 2024. So your goal is to identify short and long-term options that are sustainable to address a $19 million about general fund revenue shortfall. The purpose of this engagement would be for our firm to provide comprehensive project management and facilitation of that process with the goal of including at least one revenue option on the November 2024 ballot. I want to just talk a little bit about our relationship and what we do as your consultant of record. So the city manager's office engaged Moss Adams in 2019 as a consultant of record to provide organizational alignment and optimization services. This means that basically we can respond really quickly if the city has emerging needs for strategic priorities, things like that. Over the last 4 years, we've completed about 30 projects. We facilitated your strategic plan update
at the end of 2020. We facilitated the formation, visioning, and establishment of the Customer Service Center. We completed an internal controls review that was citywide earlier this year. And throughout this time, we've provided ongoing facilitation of management team, leadership team, as well as city council meetings. One of the reasons that I was told that the city manager at the time chose our firm is because we are an assurance firm, and that means that we do our work independently and objectively. It's performed under the standards that are established by the AICPA. If we do a performance audit or internal controls work for you, it's under generally accepted government auditing standards. So that means a couple of things. The first is that we're bound by our professional standards to be independent, to provide objective advice, and to base all of our recommendations in best practices. Also, government auditing standards require everyone who does that work to get at least 80 hours of government-related continuing education every 2 years, and every single person on our team is a really big nerd for local government and does that. So you are served by a dedicated public sector team of consultants, accountants, and auditors. Every year we work with more than 350 government clients, and so we bring in those experiences and best practices to you as well. This process will move really fast to get all of this work done over the course of 6 months. We will do finalization of a work plan, developing materials, things like that, all within the next couple of weeks if this Revenue Task Force is approved by you. We'll also project manage and collaborate with your communications and polling consultants, because that's also a piece of this work. As Keith mentioned, we'll provide regular progress reports to you all and also perform quality assurance over our work. There are 3 work streams. One is to provide revenue consulting. So define our problem statement. What are we trying to solve here? What's the target amount that we want to solve for? Get council agreement on that, as well as task force agreement on that, and education to the public. Also identifying what those potential revenue options are. So you had a comprehensive revenue task force that was in 2018. That work was very good, and there's a lot to work from, but we're in a completely different world today. And so the goal is not to simply refresh the 2018 revenue task force. Most of you weren't on council then. The city looks really different. We've been through a global pandemic. The tax situation, Marion and Polk counties, looks different today. We'll also conduct research and benchmarking, so other Oregon cities, other cities across the U.S., any best practices that we can bring in, and provide analytical support to the Finance Department, City Manager's Office as needed. For the Revenue Task Force, we'll develop a charter for the Revenue Task Force in collaboration with City Council. That includes things like roles and responsibilities of task force members. We'll help to facilitate that member selection process. And then we'll facilitate, we're thinking 6 to 8 meetings. So at a minimum, 1 meeting a month. It might be more than that, depending on how much information we have to get through and what decision-making looks like. We'll also distribute minutes, information, whatever the task force gets, council gets, the public gets, all of that information should be available, consistent, the same for everyone in this process so that your citizens are informed. And then there's a significant community engagement piece of this. So we want to be able to collect information not just from task force members and counselors who are elected representatives, but also for members of the public. So that's, again, providing all of that information, conducting 8 focus groups, so 1 per ward, providing input for community surveys and polls that are accomplished, and then conducting 3 town halls. All of this is our proposed process. Council is very much in the driver's seat here, so if there's more or less of anything that you want to see, these are your revenues, this is your task force. We're very open to making this what you want. This was our goal at saying, here's how we could get this work accomplished in this amount of time. Stakeholder engagement is really, really important as part of this process. Ultimately, things will go to the ballot, and so we want to make sure that we have inputs to your decisions of what goes there. So what are the goals of your residents, your business community, community partners, and other stakeholders? We want to understand what people's concerns are. We want to understand potential risk to the process. So as the city manager mentioned, things like compression for potential property tax levy, that's really important for us to understand, as well as folks' priorities for how to fund and what to fund. So those will go through that process of things like surveys and polls, like focus groups, work sessions with council, with the task force and management, as well as one-on-one interviews where they're needed.
Our approach to facilitation, so it will be multiple facilitated task force meetings. They will be interactive. The goal is to really increase trust, to increase communication, to get collaboration between all of the participants. This is an iterative process. We start out with some education, defining the problem statement. We gather information from staff, we gather best practices, we bring in as much insights as possible so that we can make informed decisions. Our goal is to have very focused conversations, to be very direct about the problem we need to solve and how to get there so that we can get that common understanding and we can get to some solutions for you all. Some things that we need to consider as we move through this process. So as I mentioned, this is new community engagement. It's a new task force. It's new analysis. This is not an update of the work that was accomplished in 2018 for all the reasons that I mentioned. This is an accelerated timeline, so it's going to require some pretty significant, consistent engagement from the task force members, from staff, from counselors. For folks who are interested in being on the task force, it's going to be a lift because there's a lot of education. There's a lot that we're going to ask of folks. That's something to think about. We want people to be able to show up authentically and really participate in this process in good faith. We also are considering things like equity, access to information, really seeking public input from folks that might not typically be represented at city council meetings or in public comment. And so that's something that we'll work with your communications and your polling consultants on as well. In addition to the city, we have a comprehensive translation service available and can translate into any language that you need in order to make sure that we're getting a really broad reach. So, this slide has a lot of words on it, but what I wanted to show is that this work doesn't happen in a vacuum. So on the right-hand side are those 3 work streams that were on the prior slide, and it's the same information. On the left-hand side is the city's annual budget process. So the purpose of the Revenue Task Force is to really increase our available funds, to sustain current services and potentially add services if that is a priority of the community. On the left-hand side, we have your annual budget process. So that process starts really soon, and it's about reducing costs and services to fit your current funding because you are legislatively required to have a balanced budget. So you are going through that cut process. You've had a couple of conversations already. You'll really be going through that process over the next 6 months as we go through the Revenue Task Force process as well. So in January, the Budget Committee will meet. You'll look at the financial forecast. You'll understand where you are. In February, you're going to take a look at the current fiscal year budget and make potential adjustments. And then the Budget Committee is really going to start working in the spring on next fiscal year's budget, which we know has a multi-million-dollar deficit, so we'll have to address. So that work will happen in parallel with the Revenue Task Force, and this work does not happen in a vacuum. That's important for us all to consider as we go through this process. So next steps, it's up to you. If you want to convene a revenue task force, then that's on the table. And then identifying how large we want the task force, who do we want to make up that task force, and then develop that charter, roles and responsibilities, and that application process. So I'm going to open it up now if you all have questions, thoughts, considerations about the scope or approach.
Thank you, Colleen, for your presentation. Do we have questions for Ms. Rosales? Councilor Nordyke.
Thank you so much and welcome back. For a revenue task force, have you or Moss Adams worked before on a task force in, basically leading this conversation in so many words? I'm just wondering, do you have experience working on this particular type of concept before?
We have experience supporting them before. They don't come around super often. We're doing one right now for a city in California.
Okay. I'm just curious. I've served on the Climate Action Task Force. We had 40 to 45 or so people on that. It was a pretty big group. Not everyone participated. Some zoomed in and zoomed out, if you know what I mean. Some were very active and spoke up all the time. I'm just wondering, offhand, do you have a recommendation in terms of best practices for what the ideal size is for a task force of this nature? Would you say 20, 30? I'm just wondering if you have an impression.
I would say around 20 is probably good. When we get to groups bigger than that, it can be hard for folks to have consistent, equitable participation. And one thing that we don't want is to have a large enough group that folks feel like, oh, that person says what I would say, so I don't need to show up. That's not why they're appointed.
Great, thank you. Also, when it comes to ensuring the diversity of viewpoints on the task force, Yeah, it's really important to me that we hear from truly diverse perspectives, including folks who traditionally are not invited to the table. Will you have any insights for us as we go along for example, reaching out to socioeconomically diverse groups? I'm talking folks who traditionally do not get to serve and step up in these kinds of capacities, our communities of color, people who traditionally we don't see in the decision-making room.
Yeah, other communities have struggled with this exact question for a long time. So you have some best practices we can bring in. One of the challenges is you're on a very tight timeline. And so something that we've been talking to staff about, for example, is if we convene a task force and have applications open in December, that's not super accessible if people are out of town, the holiday, like lots of stuff happens, right? So we want to make sure that we are being as broad as possible and as inclusive as possible, understanding the timeline that we're operating under. And that's something for you all to consider as well in terms of your priorities.
Great, and then my final question for the time while I continue to mull this over. I really appreciated your prior slide where you were showing budget committee on the left and task force scope of work on the right. If you could pull that back up. You know, it's really important to me that our budget committee members who are statutorily required to weigh in on our budget, that they find opportunities to weigh in on whatever our revenue decision-making process is. But how do we basically manage multiple conversations happening at once, right? We're gonna have budget committee, they're gonna have thoughts, ideas, questions, input on what we should do revenue-wise. But then we also have a revenue task force if we approve it tonight. And it even looks like the revenue task force recommendations might not emerge until after budget committee concludes, and they have to wrap up by, I think, late May, I think is the drop dead deadline. So I'm wondering, how do we both engage our existing stakeholders, i.e. our budget committee, and then also invite new voices to the task force?
So it would, the task force may have budget committee members on it if they apply and are selected for the task force, but I would anticipate it's different folks. So I would anticipate the budget committee is going to be full with the budget process. They may receive reports from the revenue task force, but they're likely to not be engaged in terms of reports out from that until after the budget is passed.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Further questions? Councilor Varney.
Thank you, Mayor Hoy. I had a similar kind of direction I was going. On the proposed timeline and major milestones, I see these arrows all going one direction, obviously, as we proceed through the months, and they're on their individual tracks. I don't see the crossover between community engagement and the task force. So my question is more, I would like to see these arrows, for instance, conduct 8 focus groups, and then that feedback immediately goes to the task force. And then the community surveys, I just wanted to make sure the task force is getting that feedback as soon as possible as part of their education and information, part of their deliberation, et cetera, rather than them being more like 2 separate paths and then the information at the end going to them.
So thank you for calling out the fact that I took my last art class in 7th grade and designed that in PowerPoint. So I promise the work streams do touch. We will give you a detailed project plan with the workflows there. That was very much meant to be an overview of the 3 different pieces of this work. But we would have a single project manager and core team members serving across those work streams, so everybody is involved in those pieces as well. And we want to make sure, as I mentioned before, everyone involved in this process gets all the same information at the same time. That's really important for you to build trust through this process as well.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Stapleton.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Colleen, for the presentation. A couple of questions for you. Will these be public meetings that the Revenue Task Force is having? I'm seeing nodding heads.
Yes.
Okay. I also saw that it was for approximately $19 million, which would not include any unhoused services. Was that, I guess, I don't know if that's a question for you or if it's a question for us, but is this how do I phrase that
I
question?
think you're asking about what's the scope of the problem
Yeah,
that the
and-
task force is trying to solve. I think
Yeah.
that's up for us to define.
Okay.
All of these things are up to us to define as the council. So,
Well, I would like us to include our unhoused services in the conversation. I also was wondering if you would be supporting city staff with any social media. We reach a lot of people in our community through social media, and I'm wondering if that's going to be part of the package.
That would likely be the role of the communications consultant.
Okay.
But we will provide data, information, visuals done by a graphic designer, not by me in PowerPoint.
Okay. I'm also concerned about equity and diversity representation on this task force. I would be really interested in talking about some form of compensation for people who are serving in this role, and to tackle the giant problem of childcare that really takes a lot of people out of the possibility of serving in this way. So those are some of the things that are on my mind when we're talking about this. Thank you.
Councilor Nishioka.
Thank you, Mayor Hoy. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you feel the process of the application and selection would be. That would be my first question.
That's a good question. So you have a well-oiled machine for your boards, committees, and commissions application selection process. So we would start there, working with city manager's office and the city attorney to make sure that everything is in alignment with your municipal code and policies. And then it's up to council to define what qualifications you want, what the scope is, whether this is Salem residents on the task force, whether folks who own a business but don't live in Salem are on the task force, things like that. So those are things that are up to you all to define. The process, the longer that an application can be open, the better, again, because of accessibility and getting the word out. At a minimum, we'd want it open for 2 weeks. But again, all of that is up to you. And we can provide some recommendations from other communities that have been successful as well.
Councilor Phillips.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Colleen, for coming back and presenting tonight. At the outset, I would just say that I'm very supportive of this effort. My comments and questions have to do with how does this compare to other things that we've done in the city of Salem. So when this has come up previously, I've led with the fact that I think that it needs to be big in scope and big in outreach. Communication was probably a large part of what went wrong in the last 6 months or more. So it's going to take a lot to overcome that. The things that I've tracked both during my time on council and before is that we did the Climate Action Task Force, which had 30 to 40 members. And another thing that we did as a community was the Our Salem Comprehensive Plan Update process. So I think the climate action process, as big as it was with 40 members or so, was smaller than the comprehensive plan update process in terms of scope and the degree of outreach. I understand that our time is very compressed, so I don't think that we can do everything that was done in the comprehensive plan update process because they had years to tackle that. But we did win awards in terms of the city staff in reaching out to as many people as possible and being as equitable as possible in that process. And I think it helped us in the end, have as little pushback as possible and get a really good product. My comment/question now is this more like the Climate Action Task Force in its outline right now? Is it more like the comprehensive plan update, or is it a blend of both?
It's more like the climate action plan. Your comprehensive plan update is required by law, and that process is somewhat prescribed by law as well. And that's a significant effort that requires years and years that goes into it. So this is more like the strategic plan or the climate action plan.
So Colleen, I'm supportive of the framework you've outlined here. I think it's a great starting point. My concern is that there are some key details that council has to make decisions on. And I'm looking at the calendar and thinking, how are you proposing that we're going to do that given that we need to have the application process open very soon. So I'm just wondering about, what are your thoughts on that?
My advice to you all would be to agendize it at one of your next meetings and have the bulleted list of here are the things we need to identify and make a decision on, and knock them all out.
Easy peasy. All right. Thank you. Further comments? Councilor Gwynn. Oh, thank you. Councilor Gonzalez.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Colleen. Obviously, a lot of this is we're trying to engage the community. That seems to be really the goal of all this. To do it properly, I think, we should make the questionnaire or the application very simple, or as simple as possible. Not have more, because for the boards and committees, we have it's a lot of questions, and the way they're answered is how we judge. So the bigger, longer we make that list, and the more difficult we ask those questions, then some people aren't going to be able to answer them properly. So the simpler the better, and we need to keep that application period open more than 2 weeks. That's just not enough. So I think that's where we need to give ourselves a little more time, because if we rush that part, we're going to fail at the end. It'll be for nothing. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. Further questions, comments? Councilor Nordyke.
Really more of a comment than a question. As I'm thinking of the kinds of individuals I would want to draft for a task revenue force or a revenue task force, I don't think of persons, I think of experiences. And I think a diversity of lived experiences will really help us. So, for example, someone who's making minimum wage or close to it would be helpful to hear their perspective, what it's like living paycheck to paycheck, because I remember doing that and I was not a fan. But it also certainly informed my perspective on what it would be like to pay a payroll tax, for example. The business community, too. We heard a lot of testimony leading up to the July 10 vote on how this might impact employers. But the realm of employers, it could mean anything from someone who employs 1,000 people to a business of one person. So it would be helpful to know in the application, if they're saying they're a business owner, are they a small employer or a large employer? And I think that's a check the box type application criteria that we could use. So it would really help us gain perspective, because while they are all engaged in business, there can be some real differences from how this affects the mom and pops versus our larger employers. And we have many larger employers. I'm also thinking back to the testimony we received, and we received some of our most pointed testimony from state employers too. And so I think we would be remiss if we didn't include someone in some sort of administrative management role from state government who would have to actually see what it would be like to implement whatever revenue task measure comes out of it. In addition to the other types of folks I mentioned, it'd be nice to have 1 or 2 young people, just because historically we haven't had a lot of engagement from young folk, even though they too are impacted by payroll taxes. So those are just some of the things that I'm thinking of in terms of what I would love to see in terms of the varieties of lived experiences. And I feel like there's something else I wanted to mention, but it's escaping me. So you can come back to me if I remember it later. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. It seems to me in terms of tonight's question, so we need to decide whether we're going to form a task force and to explore revenue options, kind of like the staff recommendation. And then we sort of have a second question to answer, which is the details. And it seems like maybe a path forward would be to take on this question. Are we going to do this? Are we not? And if we are, then direct staff to maybe fold in all of the comments they've heard and come back at our next meeting, which is on Monday, with a framework for how we might approach this. And then that would give us something to react to in terms of a process. It sounds like we're talking about an application process through our boards and commissions and that sort of thing. Or if there are other ideas, now's definitely the time to put those out there. But it seems like we should answer the question, are we going to do this or are we not going to do this? And then we can start getting into the detail of how are we going to do this. And I feel like we don't have a lot of time, so we need to really give staff some good substantive feedback tonight so they can bring something back to us very soon. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleen, first of all, thanks for being here. I enjoy you every time you come to town, and I think that you've had to handle some facilitate some difficult conversations amongst this group, and you do an amazing job. I have no doubt that you can do this. I have a couple of questions. It says you want to identify new revenue sources for inclusion on the November 2024 ballot. Are you implying a tax? Is that what this is about?
Not necessarily. So it could be many different forms. So the 2018 Revenue Task Force identified things like the utility fee, like the payroll tax, like levies. There are a lot of things to look at. We covered some of those options when we met back in the spring during the last budget adoption, some things that other Oregon cities have done. You are limited in Oregon to kind of certain things that are within your purview, but they can look different and they can apply to different parts of the community. They can be levied in different ways. And so it's really very open at this point. The goal is not to identify a specific tax to pass.
Thank you for that. Follow up to that?
Sure.
I understand that in my mind, it's like two different things we're trying to do. One is to figure out the budget, and the other is to create a task force to come up with potential revenue. And it's my feeling that maybe some potential revenue might be in the budget. So can that happen congruent to this process? Can we change what the task force is doing if we find opportunity in the budget?
Are you referring to identifying cuts in the budget?
Either cuts or reprioritization?
Yeah, so I would expect that on that left-hand side, so as you're going through the budget process, that's the budget committee's job and council's job at the same time to do that. If the revenue task force were to also take on budget cuts, it would be a little bit duplicative of what's already happening on the budget committee, and you've got citizen representatives. You have a really good model, actually, with the way that your budget committee is set up. And so I wouldn't necessarily recommend that they take that on in addition. Some communities definitely, when they go through large service cuts, they do have a similar committee, but it's often also just separated from revenue because it's hard to think about those two things at the same time.
Okay, and is the urgency about the November ballot in 2024? I mean, I realize the messaging is that there's a need for funding, and is the priority, is the urgency to get it on the ballot in November?
Yes, and a little bit more context to that. So every city, state and local governments as well, over the last 3 years got a significant amount of one-time federal and state dollars, and Salem was able to close some general fund budget gaps, fund some new services like homelessness response, identify some new positions, so some growth in the budget over the last couple of years because of that. But ultimately, you kicked the can down the road with your revenue issue because you were able to close those gaps with those one-time funds. All of those funds have to be spent by 12/31/2024 unless Congress decides to act. And so lots of cities are having to make this decision. We've seen quite a few RFPs come across that are exactly the same challenge from cities across the U.S. trying to figure out how they move forward in the new way of doing business, which is more like the 2019 way of doing business. We just lived in a little bit of a world we were able to make some additional investments.
Thank you.
Further questions? Councilor Nordyke.
I thought of it again. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You bet.
So in the scope of work, it says Adams will.
Could you turn your microphone on, Councilor?
Sorry about that.
No worries.
We are approaching 9 p.m. after all. So in the task force facilitation scope of work, it says Moss Adams will facilitate a revenue task force with the goal of, and here's the part that I don't agree with the goal of identifying one option or several options. And I think it would be a real shame if we spent all this time and money on a task force and they only come up with one option. So I urge my peers, let's have them come up with multiple options. Let's encourage them to be creative. Let's encourage them to think outside the box. One option, I could come up with one option myself. But I want to utilize Colleen as best we can, and she is a fabulous facilitator. So that's the only thing I wanted to make a point of saying. I'm prepared to move forward with supporting Revenue Task Force, but I wanted to make that clear that I will be expecting more than one option when all is said and done. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. I agree with your comments. I think it would be a mistake for us to just say, oh, we want one option, we want it for the ballot in November. I think we need more of a cafeteria approach. We might have multiple options. We might not send anything to the ballot in November. We don't know. We don't know what the options are to choose from. They might be things that don't go to the ballot. They might be things that do go to the ballot. We don't know. So I would just say, I would like to keep it a little bit, I guess, less scripted than that. I think that we're sending this task force out, should we create it, to help us solve our revenue problem. And I want all the options on the table. I don't want to limit our options, I guess and that having a date, having it go to the ballot, I think all those things are limiting. And I like what Councilor Nordic had to say. I think we need to consider all options and maybe a combination of options. You know, maybe we do send something to the ballot that's small. Maybe we should do a fee. I don't know yet because the task force hasn't done their work. But I hope we can look at all options. Additional comments? Councilor Hoy.
Just to add to that, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate that. I also, though, would like it to include the budget itself, that perhaps it can be shaped and priorities established differently. So I'd like that to be an option too for the task force.
In my mind, that's why we have a cafeteria plan, because the size of the problem can vary depending on depending on what happens with our budget. We could decide to cut whatever we want and make that gap smaller perhaps, or maybe it becomes bigger. That's why I think we need flexibility, because of course our budget will impact the problem that we're trying to solve. Bargaining will, the legislature's coming back. All those things are going to have an impact on our budget. So to me, it needs to be a little bit more fluid on the size of the problem that we're trying to solve. Councilor Quinn.
So we had a couple of gentlemen tonight, Mr. Kelly, was it Kelly Thomas? Mr. Thomas and Mr. Cowan, who both gave some public testimony. I guess my concern is if we limit this to a revenue task force, that means that's the only option. And my concern there is then we might have those folks who say, you know, it may not be only a revenue issue. I might not be making sense, but I just don't want to limit our field of folks who might want to participate, but then choose not to because of the scope of work. Does that make sense?
I think I'm following you, Councilor. I guess my thought on if I did understand you correctly, is we sort of have two groups that are going to be advising us. One is this revenue group, and one is our budget committee, and it's our job to sort of take the mix of that and figure out what the best mix at the end of the day is. So I think that's what you were saying, is that, but I don't think we should be asking this revenue task force to look at our budget. I don't think that's within their scope, and we have a group of 18 people that are going to be doing that work already. So to me, this is about, we're asking them to come up with revenue ideas to help with the budget. And then ultimately the budget committee would get it probably in next year's budget process, because that's when that revenue would likely start to become available, should there be any. So the budget committee would get a chance at it, but it would be the following year. Is that, Colleen, I don't know if you have thoughts on any of that.
That's correct. So this is multifaceted, and obviously it's related. One of the priorities of the Revenue Task Force in terms of defining the problem is also identifying their priorities. So what's the most important thing for us to fund? So Councilor Stapleton brought up homelessness services, number one, right? That might be the number one priority of the community right now. That's the number one goal in your strategic plan. If the task force says, actually, the number one thing we want to fund is recreation, then that would be the priority that's brought to council. So there are different ways to look at how we prioritize the spending of those general fund dollars. It might be public safety, right? There are also things you're required to do by law. And so that there's baseline work that the city does that we can't say no to. So part of the work at the very beginning of the task force is we define that problem, we define those priorities, bring those back to you all, and then figure out exactly what's that gap we're trying to solve. And that could be a combination of this is not a priority for our community, or this is more of a priority and we want to figure out how to fund it more.
Councilor Hoy.
Thank you. I guess it's just maybe a word of advice or caution, however you want to take it, but we just spent a bunch of money on something on the ballot, a tax, and it didn't go well. And I don't know what we'll be able to get together to, if it comes to that, convince people in November that that's a good idea. My concern is spending more money and having it appear as though we're driving towards something in November, which a lot of folks, I don't think I'm alone, are going to assume that means a tax. So I don't know how else we might be able to word it or shape it, but I just have concern about the perception of throwing more money after a tax.
I could start to answer this, and then I think the city manager should probably follow up. So a couple of things. November 2024 is a deadline for, I would say, the most optimistic to put something on the ballot. We don't know what options will come before us, as the mayor mentioned. Many of them, maybe all of them, won't necessarily have to go on the ballot, but that's a window that we don't necessarily want to be able to miss because you have to wait essentially another year. There also is a piece of continually being in dialogue with both the task force and you all to say, does this feel right? Does this make sense for our community? Whatever comes to you by the end of June does not have to go on the ballot. That's, again, another decision for council. So you really are in the driver's seat here. Keith, do you have anything else?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Something that's been going through my mind as we're having this discussion is that there isn't any absolute that we have to have something on the ballot for November of '24. It will have budgetary implications, and as you'll recall, we've presented you with a 5-year forecast that shows a pretty significant budget gap, but we do have some flexibility in there also. So I think, like Colleen was saying, that we do have some flexibility here as to how we move forward, when we move forward, and we can gauge that as we work our way through this process. I want to be in a position where there's clear and wide support for moving forward with whatever direction we choose. And if that takes 6 months, great. If that takes 9 months or 12 months to get there, or 18 months, that's okay. It's much better than putting something on the ballot and, once again, discovering, wrong rock, bring us another rock. I want to choose the right rock, to use the penguin analogy.
Further discussion? Councilor Phillips.
I want to comment on I think Councilor Stapleton brought up the idea of compensating people who serve in this position. I think we do have to look at something for equity reasons to make it more viable in terms of providing a different way of encouraging people to be here and to cover things like childcare that just, historically we don't do. I get that we're all currently volunteers, and I don't expect that to change at this exact moment. I don't think that that's the conversation, but in terms of encouraging a diverse, as many people as possible from all walks of life being involved, I too am in support of that. And then I agree with my colleagues who brought up the fact that we don't want to be too prescriptive or scripted with the language on this. But I mean, at the end of the day, I'm convinced after serving here for the last 3 years that we do have a revenue problem, and there are real issues coming in the next 2 to 3 years in terms of reductions to services. So I guess my final question would be like, if we could get a reminder from staff, if we get new revenue in 2024 in November versus 2025, when can we use that in terms of funding services? Like, when does that become available?
If a revenue measure, let's say it's a levy passed in November, I don't believe we would see that revenue until the following year.
And just real quick to add, Josh Eggleston, Chief Financial Officer. If you pass it in May, you also see it that following November. So November and May both show up that following year for property taxes.
I would like to go maybe to Mr. Atchison on the question of compensation. Do we have the ability to do that for members of our committees? Just direct compensation and I guess maybe to the city manager or to Deputy City Manager Nambori about the childcare issue. But I was wondering, do we even have the authority to do that at this point?
We do.
Okay.
It's different than counselors where there's statutory, at least, or ordinance prohibitions on compensation. I wouldn't call it compensation. I would call it a stipend or expense reimbursement, something like that. It would be a fairly limited amount. If you're compensating them at a level where they're contractors or employees, there's a whole series of parade of horribles that come into play.
Thank you. And I'm wondering if either the city manager or the deputy city manager have any thoughts on the whole issue of childcare. Do you have any thoughts on how we might solve that problem?
I suspect that Colleen has been engaged in processes where childcare was part of. When we have community meetings, there's also an element of childcare so that you can have broad participation. I don't know about 8 task force meetings. That's something that we would have to look at, but it's certainly something that we could facilitate, and if that's a necessity. I guess one other thing, thinking about the diversity question, is to not just think about the task force from a diversity perspective, but also think about the open houses and the focus groups that we're also anticipating, and how do we get that diversity there as well, so that we have as broad engagement as possible. So in direct response, we can come back with a proposal for how we deal with that.
Okay. Further discussion? All right, looks like we're out of discussion. Councillor Stapleton, do you have a motion?
I do. I move we approve the formation of a revenue task force to explore revenue options for the general fund.
I'll second that.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Nishioka. Councillor, to your motion.
I'm not sure I have too much to add, especially because it's getting to be 9 o'clock. But I think this is a really important step that we're taking, and I think, Colleen, you hit on this idea that in 2018, so much has changed between the Revenue Task Force before and our timing now. And I think that's really important. And I am excited to see how this comes together and what it looks like. I'm really excited for town halls and for meetings in our wards. I know all of us will be at those meetings and fully participating as members of our community, and I can't wait to see how the community comes together around something. I'm really looking forward to this.
Further discussion? All right, will the recorder please call the roll?
Councillor Hoy.
Nay.
Councillor Nordyke.
Aye.
Councillor Varney.
Aye.
Councillor Stapleton.
Aye.
Councillor Nishioka.
Aye.
Councillor Phillips.
Aye.
Councillor Gwynn.
Aye.
Councillor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. All right. Now, in terms of the second question, we've asked the first or answered the first question about if. Now we have to talk about how. Do you feel like, Mr. City Manager, you have enough information to bring back maybe a framework for a proposal next time, or do you need more direction?
I think we have enough feedback at this point. Colleen, head nod. Colleen agrees. Josh, Krishna, I think we've got the feedback we need at this point. we may want to come back on the 11th to give us a little bit more time to digest and to test some ideas.
My preference would be for you to come back with something next week so that we could react to it, and then maybe a final product on the 11th.
Okay, that's
So we
great.
don't-
As long as you understand that it is a work in progress on the 4th.
We do.
Great.
But we
Thank
also
you.
know that the 11th is our last meeting of the year, and
Correct.
I would hate to, I would just want to keep this conversation moving. It feels like we need an interim step, and then we can maybe finalize something on the 11th.
Yeah, we definitely need a decision by the 11th
Yeah.
so that we can post and start that conversation with the community about eligibility and membership on the task force with the objective of seating the task force at the first meeting in January.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I think this was a really good conversation. Thank you, Colleen, for your help. We are now on to pulled consent calendar items. Councilor Varney, item 3.2A.
I move that we adopt resolution number 2023-35, modifying certain fees and charges related to climate mitigation and planning services and parking fees at the Salem Municipal Airport.
I'll second that.
Motion by Varney, second by Nishioka. Councilor, to your motion.
I wanted to, I had a few questions about this, so that's why I wanted to pull it. Boy, back when we last talked about parking at the airport, I thought that we were talking about increasing it, which I think we did, and now we're talking about decreasing it. So which spaces are we talking about? Is this at the terminal? Is it the other parking area? There are things in here that just weren't clear, so that's why I wanted to bring it up.
Thank you, Councilor. I think our Public Works Director, Brian Martin, might be willing to give those a shot. Or he'll call
Absolutely.
up his able staff if not.
We are looking at the $10 spaces being at the terminal at this point in time. Once we get the second lot open and available for parking, we'll take another look and see if we should adjust this back up to 15 and leave that one at 10. We wanted to provide an area that was more economical for folks, because what we heard, and Mark Bechtel is here. If we need to, he could come up and speak to what he heard at the airport is, the first couple of weeks of service when he was out there greeting people and trying to help people know where to go. Parking cost was an issue that was brought up multiple times, and the use that we're seeing right now has been pretty limited, 10 to 30 or 40%. I did notice this last weekend after adding a third flight, the main parking lot was about 2/3 full, so that's a significant increase than what we have been seeing, but it's still, we're not there yet where we feel, we're going to draw the people we need at $15 a day.
So as I had understood your comments from a private conversation that you and I had, Mr. Martin, basically what we're seeing a higher utilization of Uber, Lyft, maybe people dropping people off at the airport, and we're not getting the utilization of our parking lots there that we thought we might get. And so the thought is from staff is that if we decrease the rate, we might actually increase our revenue because we'll increase the utilization. Did I summarize our conversation fairly?
Yes, that was perfect. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So that's the issue, to try to get more people in the lot. Councilor, go, yes.
Thank you, Mayor Hoy. So I guess I'm trying to see more of the relationship between rideshare, people dropping people off, and the revenue. I'm wondering, and maybe Mr. Martin, you can answer this question. Are folks potentially concerned about security issues or other issues besides just the cost? Could that be doing
I think it's just super
it?
convenient to have somebody drop you off. I think that's the whole issue. Our airport's right in the middle of town and super easy. I don't think we haven't heard any of those that
Okay.
I'm aware of.
We have not heard any of those comments.
Okay. Okay, thanks. I was just kind of wondering if there were other reasons behind this.
I think it's one of the benefits of a centrally located airport. Go ahead, Councilor.
Thank you. Then I had one more question. Why are we including the charges related to climate mitigation in this particular item. I was just wondering why they were grouped together.
Microphone, please.
Yeah, sorry. They're both on the master fee schedule, so they go together when you make changes.
So we're doing a master fee schedule amendment in this motion. And so even though they're two different topics, it's all part of the same amendment.
Changes for the price of one.
Okay, I was just trying to see that whole climate mitigation thing and charge for space and see how it tied in, so thank you.
Yeah. Further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Nordike. Aye. Counselor Barney.
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton.
Nay.
Counselor Nishioka.
Aye.
Counselor Phillips.
Aye.
Counselor Gwynn.
Nay.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye, motion passes. All right, item 3.3A, Counselor Hoy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move that we table this purchase of this property for further discussion. Anybody?
I'll second for purpose of discussion.
I appreciate it. Thank
You
you.
bet. Motion by Hoy, second by Hoy.
Well, that's fun.
That's the first time that's happened.
Yes, it is. I want to understand, and may I ask a question?
Certainly.
Okay. It says that the funding for this acquisition will come from the Parks System Development charges. Is that the general fund?
Who wants to answer that? Mr. Eggleston, Mr. Martin, Mr. Archer? I see everybody going to their microphone, but nobody turning it on.
I'm sorry, I missed the question.
The SDCs that would pay for the purchase of this park property, is that general fund? I believe that was the councilor's question.
No, they're not. They're in the extra capacity facility fund that is dedicated to SDC purchases.
Extra capacity facility, what is that?
So it's a capital construction fund that's budgeted every year. SDCs go in, purchases and developer reimbursements come out.
Fascinating. Let's see then. My other question was just, can we afford it? Could that money be used for anything else, or is that specifically for property purchase?
It's specific for park property purchases, yeah. So there are some improvements you can do with it, but it's meant for system expansions.
I really appreciate the clarification on that, because, again, perception being what it is, to drop 15 or 1.5 million rather on a piece of property right now might catch some eyeballs. So thank you for that. And I can't wait for the people in Ward 6 to have nice things, better things in a park, and some true equity. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor. As a person who lives in Ward 6, I couldn't agree more. Councilor Stapleton.
I would like to, well, from your comments, I was wondering if I might make an amendment for staff recommendations. Or do you still want to table it?
No, I don't, actually.
Okay, so
I
I
am
would like to make,
satisfied.
I would like to make an amendment.
A substitute motion?
Substitute motion, yes, thank you, for staff recommendations.
Second.
Substitute motion by Stapleton, seconded by Phillips. So we're now debating that, and then we'll vote on that. Is there further discussion? Councilor Gwynn.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
So how many unimproved park properties do we have? And how long do these properties sit in this undeveloped state before they're developed to a usable park?
Mr. Archer, do you have that one? Those two?
I'll give it a shot. Thank you, Mayor. Scott Archer, Deputy City Manager for Community Services. Also want to note that our Parks Planning Manager, Rob Romanek, is here and can help address any questions. I don't know if we know off the top of hand what the number of undeveloped properties is. What I can tell you is, and we can certainly find that out if you'd like to know and bring that information back, it is a common practice to acquire properties for future park development through different processes, be that like we're doing this purchase is a well-planned, working with a developer who has got the property available in a specifically targeted, identified area of need. We've spent, I think, 3 or 4 years working towards this point of bringing this property to acquisition. So just as an example, it does take quite a bit of time to acquire property, target the area, and then oftentimes what happens is before that gets developed otherwise, so we can protect it for parks and open space purposes, we need to lock that property up even though we don't have the development funds right away. So to Councilor Hoy's questions earlier about use of the funds, the SDC fund is specifically for the parks acquisition and development purposes. It can't really be used for other purposes. So we accumulate those funds, we target properties, we do a good job of, kind of developing how we're going to acquire these properties. And then sometimes, unfortunately, we do have to sit for a while until they can become developed. Maybe we can find a grant or some other opportunities that move that along quicker. But yes, that is somewhat of a lengthy process, and it does take some time. But for the example right now, if we were to not complete this transaction, that property would likely, or I think would probably go to just develop into more residential units, and we would lose the opportunity to have a piece of property secured for a future park in this area that we know we specifically need. So, yeah.
And typically, when we have one of these very large developments, which East Park Estates is a very large development, we do this kind of thing. We have property, for instance, I think that was from before your time, Councilor, but out on Kale in that area, because there's a huge new development. So there are 2 big fields out there that are just waiting, that we own them. They're just waiting to be developed at some point in the future.
But is it like 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
I think it can be all of those, depending on the situation and depending on the revenue. I mean, the bond sort of maybe bumped a couple of those up. Mr. Romanek could speak more intelligently to all of these things, but it really just depends on the process. We put various parks into that park master planning process, and then they go into the funding stream at some point. Mr. Romanek, would you say better words than I am?
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Rob Romanek, Parks Planning Manager. I'm just going to build on the comments the mayor said. It could be several years, or it could be in the instance of a park I worked on a few years ago, Secor Park in South Salem. It was 30 years between the time the property was purchased / donated to the city and partially developed. I want to highlight that we do have a tool in our toolbox that we haven't perhaps done an excellent job of utilizing, and that's in our park system master plan. We have a policy about what we call pre-development or interim use of our park properties, and I think this site is an excellent opportunity to utilize that tool. And so that would essentially looks like is we fast track a mini plan for the park, working with the neighborhood association, and we would endeavor to create that plan within 1 year of the acquisition, and to start implementing that plan within 2 years. So some basic improvements can be made to the site. That would include walking paths and other amenities, relatively small scale amenities that could coexist with further formal development in the future.
That's kind of akin to what we did out on Brown Road Park. For instance, it's been an undeveloped park for a number of years, but it has a basic walking path around it, and it's used as a community garden. The neighborhood association went together and put in a community garden. And so the development part of the park hasn't been there yet, but yet it's been used by the neighbors for a great purpose. Councilor.
I guess I want to know what we can do to make that happen, what he just said. Because there is such a need in Ward
need.
6. So.
Yeah.
What can we do to make that happen?
I have so many comments, referring back to our revenue task force, but we need to help the money. It's all about the money.
And I'll just add, in this instance, I think we explore the use of system development charges, the same funding source.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask.
However, I want to, that is a relatively small amount of revenue for a tremendous amount of park need in our community. So I don't want to oversell it. We could potentially look at using some of it. We have a lot of demands on that funding source.
So it wouldn't be general fund then, it would be those systems development, right?
Well, I think that ultimately those are all choices that the budget committee would make, but generally speaking, yeah, it would be the system development charges. We got Councilor Staple, and I'll come back to Councilor Hoy.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to highlight the fact that I think where the parks issue hits the general fund is maintenance,
Right.
right? So when we develop a park, then we have to maintain it. And that's where we're gonna need some more revenue because we can't keep, developing parks. And I think you're right, this area needs it. There's so many areas in the city of Salem that need their parks developed. I know West Salem has a lot of them that they're just itching to get done. And so I think, again, it comes back to that revenue conversation. And, maybe that's a park district. I don't know, right? I'm open to anything. But that is part of the conversation too, maintenance.
Yeah. Councilor Hoy.
Thank you. That was my question. Thank you.
Okay. Further, Councilor Varney. Yep.
Thank you, Mayor Hoy. I had a couple of questions about the park SDCs. I'm just curious, can they be used as match for a grant?
Yes. An example of that would be this year the city received a grant from the state for Gear Park to develop a skate park. So that grant is roughly 13% of the project cost, and then so the remainder of the project is SDCs.
Okay, thank you. The other thing is you mentioned the pre-development planning potentially with the neighborhood association. Can a neighborhood association apply for a Salem Parks Improvement Fund grant that will tie into that pre-development?
Yes, the example Mayor Hoy mentioned at Brown Road Park would be an excellent example of that, where the NOLA Neighborhood Association has applied for, I believe it was 3 or 4 rounds of grants to slowly and incrementally make improvements to that park over time.
Okay, thank you.
Further discussion.
Mayor, before you move on, may I just make one more quick final comment?
Please.
Which is, thank you. All of this relates to what a lot of your conversation is, Council, is related to not just funds, but also the prioritization of how we use those funds. And one of the biggest ways that we do that is through our Parks and Rec System Master Plan. We have to reference that frequently, and that's in fact how we identified that this is an area of need. But just kind of a plug that we're about to embark on updating that system master plan, which leads to community decisions and help formulating how we prioritize where things go and how we do those, and do we accelerate parks in certain areas. So we encourage people to think about that and engage in that process and provide input. So there'll be a lot of opportunity for public input into that process soon.
Thank you for that additional context. I think that's really helpful. And just as a reminder, Council, we are voting here momentarily on the substitute motion, which is staff recommendation. Is there further discussion before we do that? Councilor Nordyke.
I just had a question. I'm not very familiar with this property. What's the tree canopy like on this property right now?
There's one really beautiful grove of old oak trees. It's right across the street from Terra Gardens. It's the old mushroom plant.
Okay.
So, and there's a lot of scrubby little trees that aren't anything.
Yeah.
But one beautiful.
And the other advantage to potentially purchasing this property is that we have been on a tree planting bonanza across town, and purchasing this property means that we can find ways to further our climate action goals as a city, which I think is important in addition to having all kinds of recreation for all abilities for that area. My next question, what's the nearest park? For folks who live near that area, how far do they have to go to find a park that is over an acre in size? Would that be McKay?
Weathers or Royal Oak?
Royal Oaks is the closest park, nearest park to the site.
And how far away is that, roughly?
It is approximately a mile away.
Okay, well, it's not without parks.
Side note, how big is Royal Oaks Park?
I do not have the acreage off the top of my head, but I'll tell you, it is a neighborhood park that is between 2 and 10 acres, so it's somewhere in between
It's
the
small.
two.
I know.
Thank you. Further discussion? All right, looks like we're ready to vote on the substitute motion.
Counselor Varney.
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton.
Aye.
Counselor Nishioka.
Aye.
Counselor Phillips.
Aye.
Counselor Gwynn.
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Counselor Nordyke.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye, motion passes. And that disposes all of the items under number 5. So now we're going to be on information reports. We'll go through those directly. 6A, does anybody have anything? (6B). 6C. All right, that concludes the information reports. We are on to first readings. And we just FYI, everybody, we're going to be using some AI or some artificial reading intelligence tonight. I'm not sure what that's called.
Yes, we
Automated.
sure are, Mayor, and he's going to bring the ordinance up on the screen, and then I will start the read aloud.
Got some lengthy readings to do.
Bob? Okay. Well, you know what? Maybe we'll not post it on the projector. Are you? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and get started then.
Ordinance Bill number 1623. An ordinance relating to the sign code, amending SRC 300.850, 900.005, .020, .025, .030, .050, .055, .060, .070, .075, .080, .085, .090, .095, .100, .105, .110, .115, .120, .125, .130, .135, .140, .145, .150, .155, .160, .165, .170, .175, .185, .195, .215, .230, .245, .265, .275, .280, .300, .305, .330, .335, .340, .345, .350, and deleting SRC 900.035, .040, .045, .065, .180, .190, .200, .205, .210, .220, .225, .290, .310, .315, and .325.
The end.
All right. Counselor Stapleton.
I move staff recommendations.
Second.
Motion by Stapleton, second by Phillips. After all that, we're just going to do staff recommendation. Awesome.
Would you like me to read?
No, thank you.
Okay, that's what I thought. Jeez.
Counselor, to your motion?
I don't really have much to say. No,
All right.
this is our sign code, and again, I was really pleased that we passed it and found compromise, and it felt good to help staff get this done. I know this was a long time coming, and so it's a thrill that it's here at first reading.
Further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Stapleton.
Aye.
Counselor Nishioka.
Aye.
Counselor Phillips.
Heck yes.
Counselor Gwynn.
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Counselor Nordike. Aye. Counselor Varney.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. All bets are off after 9 p.m. apparently, in terms of decorum. So, item 7.1B.
Ordinance Bill Number 1723, an ordinance relating to the nonprofit corporation low-income housing tax exemption program, amending SRC Sections 2.870, 0.880, 0.890, 0.900, and 2.910.
Counselor Stapleton, do you have a motion?
I move staff recommendations.
Second.
Counselor, to your motion?
I think this is great, and we should vote for it.
Awesome. And the motion is to advance it to a second reading. Further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Nishioka.
Aye.
Counselor Phillips.
Aye, but a lot.
Counselor Gwynn.
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Counselor Nordike.
Aye.
Counselor Varney.
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. 7.1C.
Ordinance Bill Number 1823, an ordinance declaring certain territory located at 7002 Sunnyside Road Southeast and 7102 Cains Place Southeast, annexed to the City of Salem, prescribing zoning and withdrawing the territory from the Salem Suburban Rural Fire Protection District.
Who wants to make the motion on this? Counselor Gwynn?
I move staff recommendation.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Counselor, anything to your motion?
I'm just excited to meet our housing goals and have more properties developed in South Salem, in my ward.
Yes, thank you. Any further discussion? Will the recorder please call the roll?
Counselor Phillips.
Aye.
Counselor Gwynn.
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Counselor Nordike.
Aye.
Counselor Varney.
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton.
Aye.
Counselor Nishioka.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye. Motion passes. On to second readings. Item 7.2A.
And we are way ahead of the game on this one. So
Awesome.
it's up there. Let's see. One moment here.
Ordinance Bill Number 723. An ordinance relating to the development of large parking lots, park and rides, and single-room occupancy housing, amending SRC 111.001, 112.015, 220.005, 400.020, 510.005, 511.005, 513.005, 0.010, 514.005, 0.010, 515.005, 0.010, 521.005, 524.005, 0.010, 525.005, 530.040, 0.050, 531.010, 532.015, 533.010, 0.015, 534.010, 0.015, 535.010.015, 536.010, 0.015, 537.005, 0.010, 540.005, 541.005, 542.005, 543.005, 550.010, 552.005, 702.020, 806.015.035.040, 0.055, 0.060, 0.075, 0.080, and SRC 807.020.
Counselor Gwynn.
Aye.
Counselor Gonzalez.
Aye.
Counselor Hoy.
Aye.
Counselor Nordike.
Aye.
Counselor Varney.
Aye.
Counselor Stapleton.
Aye.
Counselor Nishioka.
Aye.
Counselor Phillips.
Aye.
Mayor Hoy.
Aye, motion passes. That concludes item 7.2. We already disposed of item 8. We are adjourned.